Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to welcome you all to our annual charity and not-for-profit seminar. We're running today as a hybrid event, so welcome to those of you at home or in the office who are joining us online. I'm so pleased that so many of you were able to join us here in person today, and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Sarah Twist. I'm Head of Charities and Associate Partner at AC Mole, and I have been specialising in charities for over 20 years with AC Mole. I'm proud to head up our fantastic charities team, and we serve a wide range of charities from large charitable groups to small village charities and everything in between. Lots of our team are here today, so please take the opportunity to say hello to them. So we've got a very full lineup today. We've got some fantastic speakers, and so if I just have a quick run through of what the agenda is, of what you can expect. Shortly, I'll be passing over to Lexi Shaw, Managing Partner at AC Mole, who'll be setting the scene on the charity sector and the wider economic situation at present. Then Charles Mosquita, Charities Director at Quilter Chevier, and also a trustee of a number of different charities, will be discussing what keeps him up at night. The first technical update, I will be covering some of those changes that have come with the new Statement of Recommended Practice, which was recently released. And then we'll be breaking for coffee and networking opportunity for those in the room at 11 o'clock. For those of you at home, we'll have an online timer on screen so you'll know when we're due back. So after coffee, we'll have our second technical update where Lexi Shaw will be covering some of the more technical areas across lease accounting and income recognition. And then we have Ben Deardham from Quilter Chevier, who will be an investment manager with a year in review. And then our last speaker of the day is Stuart Wood, Head of Registrations from the Charity Commission. We're delighted to welcome here today, and he's talking about driving change, philanthropy, and the evolving charity sector. We've set some time aside at the end for a question and answer session. For those of you who are joining us online, if you have logged into your Google account, you'll be able to ask those questions of us remotely. We aim to run to time and to finish at 1 o'clock. And for those of you in the room, we will have lunch and more networking opportunities at that time. So now I will pass you over to Lexi for the first session on setting the scene.
Perfect, that's good. I thought it was going to have to be Charles for a minute then. I was a bit worried. Well, I'll save that till later. Oh, good morning, everyone. Fantastic to see so many of you able to join us in the room this morning. And as Sarah mentioned, I know there's many joining us online as well. For those of you I've not met before, my name's Lexi Shaw. I'm Managing Partner at AC Mole, and I'm going to start by just having a bit of a setting the scene, as Sarah mentioned, the background to the economic environment in which all charities are operating at the moment. But before doing so, I just wanted to take a moment, if I may, to extend my thanks to Sarah, to the charities team, and all of the team at AC Mole. There's been a huge amount of work gone in behind the scenes to prepare for this seminar, not least with only having the SORP for a couple of weeks, for full 300 pages. And I know Sarah's been burning the midnight oil, turning those or reading those pages to give you an update. I know Richard and the IT team here are all set up as well. So a huge thanks to all of them. I'm also delighted to share with you that after 22 years, I believe, with AC Mole, Sarah will be promoted to partner next year, and it's in recognition of a huge amount of work, and I'm sure you'll all join me in congratulating her. Perfect. So, setting the scene. We have kind of, in the last couple of years, coined the term perma-crisis. I think it actually entered into the Oxford Dictionary off the back of the global pandemic. And then the cost of living crisis. I think for charities, in fairness, there's a continuing perma crisis. There's the continuing increasing demand for services. There's cost increases, particularly in relation to staff and inflation, and real challenges around funding sources, whether that's from the government or whether that's from donations. So I think it's a perpetual perma crisis for charities. And I think in light of that, when everybody's so busy trying to manage and run their organisations in that environment, it's as important as ever that we just take a moment to reflect and to think about what that means for your organisation and what that means for your strategies and what that means looking forward. So I think we're just going to take 10 minutes to take a bit of a pause at the start and to reflect on that. And there's been some fantastic reports issued this year which provide a bit of an overview of what's happening more broadly in the sector. We will circulate these slides afterwards, and they do all have links to these publications. So if there's any that you want to go and look at in more detail, and some of them fantastic, I would encourage you to do so. You'll be able to do that by following the link in the slides. So the first report that I wanted to just look at was one published by the Charities Aid Foundation, which looks at the UK giving, so the patterns around donation and giving to charities within the UK. This report found that fewer people than ever are donating to charity. And it highlights the need to consider what that means in the longer term for charities operating in the UK, and the need to find how do we find a sustainable giving landscape in the face of many of these challenges. The report found, and I think this is heartening, that the UK public donated over £15 billion to charity in 2024. That figure in itself is worth just taking a moment to reflect on. It's a huge number. And there's some really interesting analysis in that report as to the types of those donations, the types of donors, and what reasons they cited for giving money to charities. And if your charities are in any way reliant on public giving, this report provides a really interesting insight into those different sources of giving and donations and how they're evolving over time. This slide shows the 15 million broken down by source of donation. And as you would expect, the majority of that, so 2.7 billion, comes from the regular direct debits and monthly standing orders. But there's also some other really interesting areas of giving in there. Donations made directly through a charity's website or app constituted almost 1.9 billion. If you think about your own website, if someone interested in your charity has navigated their way to your webpage, how easily can they then make a donation? Is that an avenue which is open to your donors? Similarly, crowdfunding campaigns raised over £1 billion. And again, is that an area that's part of your fundraising strategy or considered? Social media also raising 750 million. So some really interesting insights here around the type of donations, where they're coming from and sources, which I think is worth considering for many charities. The report also looks at the percentage of the UK population who donated to charity or sponsored in the last 12 months. And as I think everyone is aware who works in the sector, those trends sadly continue to decline. And in fact, this report, which has been published annually since 2016, for the first time ever, it noted that the proportion of the population who donated to charity in the last 12 months, that's the top line there, was only half of the population, so the lowest proportion ever. And indeed, the individuals who had sponsored somebody for charity, so that's the black line on the chart, had fallen 43% over the period in which the report has been generated, so now falling to 21%. And the report found that a full 3.9 million people cancelled a regular charitable payment in the last year. And I think a reflection on some of the wider challenges around financial situations for people who are donating to charities. That decline in donor numbers was evident in all regions across the UK. What was particularly sobering for me, though, is when you looked at those statistics by age group. And this chart shows those donation percentages, but by age group. So the top line, the gold line, is those 65 and above. And the bottom line, the red line, is those in the age group 16 to 24. And as you'll see, it's that bottom line which shows a real reduction in the engagement of young people in donating to charities. The pandemic in 2020 being a real inflection point and a real significant decline to almost only a third of young people engaging or donating with charities. And this, if your charity is reliant on public donations and fundraising as a long-term source, this is a really sobering statistic and something really to be considering when you're looking at your long-term strategy and how you are engaging with future donors. The report helpfully makes a number of recommendations for charities, donors and policymakers. And these include in communicating the importance of donations to your organisation, making sure you're telling stories about your work and the impact that donations have on your work. And this is because many donors cited those as reasons for making a donation. There was a clear correlation, the report found. Other suggestions including around understanding how to channel the social interest of young people into engagement with your charity and regularly reviewing your fundraising strategy with an eye on what is happening in the broader economic environment and some of these long-term trends and changes. The report also looked at key challenges facing charities, and I don't think any of these will necessarily come as a surprise to many of you in the room. 80% of charities listed financial challenges as being one of their top 3 issues that they're facing at the moment, whether that's sustainability, increased competition for funding, or balancing restricted and unrestricted funds. Similarly, 77% of charities mentioned operational issues as being their top 3 challenges, with 44% citing increasing costs as a significant challenge. In context, that number, that 44%, was 14% only 3 years ago. So I think a real material change in the cost base for many charities at the moment. And obviously with the budget announcement ongoing this morning, there's context, I think, or scope for further changes to follow. Again, the report makes a number of recommendations. It talks about retaining a laser focus on your strategic plans, but with an eye to the wider economic environment and a clear consideration of the impact that that can have on those plans. It also highlights again the real need to carve out protected time for strategic planning when everyone is so busy delivering services and servicing beneficiaries and managing these challenges. How good are your executive team or your board at carving out that time, to making time to sit and reflect? I think it's more important than ever. The report also looked at the proportion of people volunteering. And I think, again, as anyone who knows in the sector, anyone who's involved in the sector knows, this continues to be a real area of challenge. Volunteering rates continue to decline. Again, this is across the country and in all age groups, but with actually women dropping out at twice the rate of men. The levels falling again in 2024 to only 10% of the population volunteering. That was a reduction of 1.5 million volunteers on the year before. Most of the charities I'm involved with or work with are highly reliant on volunteers to run their day-to-day operations. This trend does not appear to be changing, it appears to be continuing. So taking that time to reflect on what does that mean for your long-term plans for your charity and strategy, how is that going to affect your ability to deliver some of those key services in the future? Perhaps on a brighter note, the Charity Commission also published a report called Public Trust in Charities. And this found that public trust in charities remains consistently and resiliently high. And I think this is a real strength for the sector and something that is perhaps sometimes overlooked. Charities rated second only to doctors in terms of ranking for public trust. attaining a score of 6.5 out of 10, and that has been consistently high for a number of years. You may note at the bottom there that government ministers ranked lowest at 3.5, and we'll see whether the budget this morning has any impact on that increasing or decreasing. But I think it's very important to acknowledge that. One statistic which was very sobering for me and stood out in this report, though, is that they also looked at the proportion of people surveyed who had themselves relied on charitable support in the last 12 months. Back in 2020, 3% of those who responded to the survey had themselves sought basic support, so food or medical support from a charity. In 2025, that figure had seen a threefold increase to 9%. And I think just reflecting on that for a moment, a threefold increase in the number of people seeking basic support from charities in a really short period of time. And I think perhaps it's a sobering reflection on some of the wider challenges faced within the UK at the moment. But certainly from the perspective of charities, it's evident that demand for their services is greater than ever. Perhaps unsurprisingly then, in light of some of those challenges, the Charity Commission also published a report which considered risks faced by the charity sector. This is a really good report, and I would encourage you to have a read. The Commission acknowledges the challenges faced by the sector and finds that charities have shown remarkable resilience, which I would agree with, in the face of many of these challenges. The assessment provides an overview of some of the key risks the sector faces at the moment and encourages trustees to consider these when looking at their own risk register. And the Commission highlights a need for trustees to have an awareness of these risks and to actively consider what they may be able to do to mitigate them. Unsurprisingly then, the first key risk identified was around financial resilience. The Charity Commission found growing evidence, and personally I'd say there's quite a body of evidence around financial squeeze within the sector, falling donations, as we've seen on earlier slides, increasing costs, particularly for those charities with a significant staff cost base, and increasing demand. The report highlighted a number of interesting statistics which I thought I'd share with you. 43% of charities in the last year reported expenditure that exceeded income. And I'll speak to many trustees and they'll say, we're planning a deficit next year, and they'll feel uncomfortable about that. Well, you're not alone. There's quite a few charities find themselves in that position. And indeed, the Commission highlighted that the risks are even more stark for smaller charities. So collectively, charities with income less than 500,000, collectively their costs exceeded income for charities within that group. As a result, then, the Commission found that increasing number of charities are relying on reserves to continue operating performance. And there's little or no headroom for charities to invest in longer-term projects. So some real challenges around financial resilience. The report does provide some really useful advice and resources and encourages trustees to consult the extensive online guidance which the Commission has issued on these matters. It encourages trustees to ensure they understand their duties to ensure financial stewardship for their charity, to plan and act on any early warning indicators, and to regularly review your financial forecasting and your management information to ensure that's fit for purpose. And I think for me, management information is a real key area here. It's something where sometimes trustees don't always, I see, receive that full suite of information that they might need, whether on a timely basis, the completeness of that to support this decision-making process. The second risk they found was around the risk to public benefit. They highlighted a small number of compliance cases, but found that these had had a disproportionate impact in terms of media reporting and potential perception on the sector. Whilst they found few cases of deliberate abuse, they did highlight the risk attached to dominant individuals, whether that's within your trustee board or within your organisation, and how that poses increased risk of conflict of interest or other activities which are not in the public interest. They make a number of recommendations around ensuring your financial controls are fit for purpose, knowing what your charity's objects are, and remaining vigilant and reporting concerns. They also highlighted the need for trustees to ensure that they are aware of their key duties and responsibilities, and found that a lack of awareness had contributed to some of these issues in some of these cases. I think it would be fair to say, however, that the regulatory landscape itself is changing. This slide summarises all of the changes that have been announced in the last 12 months. We'll do our best between us to provide an update on those today, but there are a lot of changes, so it's really important to consider how key individuals within your organisation are kept up to speed with those. So I think that's all I had to say from a setting the scene perspective. I think it's really important with all of those challenges around at the moment that we take time to reflect and consider what they mean for our organisation. I'm now delighted to hand over to Charles Mosquita. He's Charities Director at, Stuart Wood. Our pictures have all gone to skew this morning, haven't they? I didn't even press a button and that changed. Oh, no, we won't be starting soon. I'm not pressing anything. I'm going to pass this over to Richard. Charles's slides are talking about what keeps him awake at night. And in fact, there are no slides, so I have no visibility of what's coming. But I'm sure it will be fantastic and very insightful. But on that note, I will hand over to Charles. You don't need the clicker, do you?
No, I don't. Good morning, everybody. Unusual for an investment manager to have no slides whatsoever, no charts. I'm going to leave that to my colleague, Ben. I've been a charity trustee for about 30 years, and I thought I would reflect on what are the things keeping me awake at night is probably a little bit dramatic, but just what are the things that have been concerning me over the last year or so. And I thought I would start with the Centobalia case. How many of you are aware of the Centobalia case? Only a few. Excellent. Well, that's good news. So I'm now going to have to tell you a story. When I finish telling you the story, I'm going to ask you as either as the charity commissioners or as trustees, what are the lessons you think we should learn from this? So this was a charity that was set up in 2006 by Prince Harry when he was on a gap year in Lesotho, and he set it up with Prince Sesu of Lesotho, and it was to help children with HIV or AIDS. And Lesotho happens to be, I think, got the second highest rate of children under 14 with AIDS, and it's about 36,000. And they've also got around 360,000 orphans. So very much so a charity that was needed and help out there. In April 2024, they hit the headlines. Now, I have no inside knowledge about this. Stuart does, and he may well reflect on some of the things. So I am just taking information that has come from the media and from the press. So it hit the headlines, I think Sky News was the first, around expenditure of somewhere in the region of £430,000 on consultancies around strategy. And then in March 2025, there was Prince Harry and Prince Sesu resigned as patrons in support of a majority of the board of trustees who had resigned because the chair of trustees, who had been appointed a year before, there had been a falling out. The chair of trustees decides to take their trustees to court, or to legal action, which I think was the High Court, and report them as a whistleblower to the Charity Commission. And they were, this is the Dr. Sophie Chanduka, who had actually previously been a trustee from 2008 to 2014. So she knew the organisation and the organisation would have known her. But she accused her co-trustees of bullying, harassment, and misogyny and misogynoir. I had to say I had to look up what misogynoir was, but that's effectively sexism and racism. And this was obviously being very played out in public. I can't remember where Dr. Chandu went on, but she went on to one of the news channels and was fairly vocal about the issues and the problems that had arisen. So the key thing here is that there is a massive breakdown in the Charity Commission then sets up an investigation into the thing. Now, what do you think as trustees that you should be concerned about? Why do you think this kept me up awake at night? Does anybody want to have a crack? Or what do you think the findings of the commission were on this? Oh, come on, somebody must have an idea. What? No, absolutely. That's not actually what I'm looking for. Yes?
It's the governance arrangements surrounding the whole matter.
Yeah. So okay, let me ask you another question. How many of you are trustees? Let's put your hands up first. I assume everybody. Excellent. Good. How many of you as trustees have procedures to deal with disputes within your board? A few of you. Okay, well then you're going top of the class. I can tell you the 3 boards I sit on, none of them had any form of procedures or thought process or guide of how to deal with disputes. So what was really interesting, I think, and I have to say we'll circulate the Commission's report because I think it's definitely worth reading. It's a very good report and it's very clear. The Commission criticised all parties for allowing the dispute to play out in public, in part to do with the charity damaging the charity's reputation, and it has had a massive damage in its reputation. I mean, the turnover of this charity was 4 million, so it's not exactly small, and certainly subsequent to this fallout, their ability to raise funds has been dramatically reduced. In fact, they've got themselves into financial problems. And the other thing that the Charity Commission pointed out, that by playing this out in public, they were undermining the reputation of all charities, which I think is fundamentally absolutely correct. The other thing I think was interesting, and I suspect the Commission has a big problem with this one, is that the role of the regulator is not as a mediator or to resolve internal issues. It's up to us trustees to do it, which why having some sort of procedures in place and having some sort of way of dealing with disputes is really, really important. But the Commission made it very clear that they weren't there to adjudicate, they weren't there to mediate in internal disputes. One of the issues, and again, I'm going to sort of add 2 and 2. I hope I'm making 4, not 5. But delegation of certain powers, including the executive chair, wasn't clear. So what I'm suspecting has happened is there was some comment about the chair wanting to be paid, which was interesting. But secondly, about the difference between being a chair of trustees and the rest of the trustees. And of course, as we all know, there is no legal difference. We are all equal. It's just the chair obviously is there hopefully to provide leadership and to bring people together, which in this circumstances didn't happen. The other thing was quite interesting, and again, I hadn't thought of it. How many of you have patrons or ambassadors, or a few of you? Do you have any guides to them of what they can and can't do? Okay, well, this came up in the report. Patrons' role was not clearly defined. And I have to say, again, with the charities I'm involved with, certainly with Bowel Research UK, we have a number of patrons, and we have no guidance around what their role is, what they can say, what they should be doing, or anything else. And we've had to go back as a board to think about that and consider it. There was no process or policy to deal with internal disputes. Good news is, if you haven't got a policy, I've just designed one for a charity I'm involved with, and I'm very happy to share it. I'm quite proud of it, actually. I haven't shown it to the Commission yet, so we might ask Stuart to just give it a seal of approval, or semi-approval, if nothing else. And then the other thing they found, which I probably should have said at the thing, is that they could find no widespread or systematic bullying, harassment, misogyny, or misogynoir. And the other thing I would just say to you is this board was not exactly an inexperienced board. I mean, one of the trustees was Baroness, I think it's Chalker of Walmsley, who had been an MP for about 30 years. She had been Minister of Transport, Minister of Europe, and also Minister for or Overseas and Africa in the Foreign Office, and somebody described her as the number 2. So I didn't bother to look at the rest of the trustees, but you could see that there was obviously a situation that had exploded. You'd got to a place where the chair of trustees was refusing to resign on the request of the other trustees, and of course all of them are volunteers, and then you've got one trustee threatening legal action and reporting to you the commission. So quite a scary place to be, really, frankly. And I have to say, I personally would have probably followed them and would have resigned as well if I'd had somebody, just because you're a volunteer and you're not paid to do it. So it's just something to be aware of. The other thing I found slightly peculiar is, again, and I've gone back to check in governing instruments, of how many of my governing instruments stipulate the minimum number of trustees, because that was the other thing I found rather peculiar, is that you could have effectively the majority of the board resigning, leaving one trustee. And the other problem that they would have had is that then that one trustee would have been appointing the new trustees. So you've got absolutely no independence in that selection. I've got deathly silence. Anyway, to the moral to the story, so the thing we're waking up, actually there is a solution to it, is just make sure you've got policies and procedures in place to deal with board disputes. You may have it for staff. The other thing is cybercrime. How many of you have been thinking about cybercrime? A few of you. Well, by the end of this, I hope a few more of you are going to. I have to say, this is one thing, again, being chair of a finance committee, I think about a lot, is cybercrime and fraud. Just to give you, to put some numbers on it, because I'm a person who likes to put numbers, UK business, so we talked about donations of just over 15 billion. Well, UK business loses to cybercrime 14.7 billion, it is estimated, and I suspect that is low. 30% of charities have experienced cyber attacks in the last 12 months, so that's 61,000 organisations. That probably means we'll all have it within 3 or 4 years. Interestingly, how much percentage-wise do you think is this cybercrime is done through phishing? Does everybody know what phishing is? Yeah, through emails. How much of that cybercrime do you think? Give me a percentage, anybody. 90%. Sorry? 90? Yeah, 85 to 90, very good. So what do we think is an easy solution to help at least mitigate some of the risks of cybercrime?
Don't click on links.
Well, no, don't click on link. I was thinking more of staff or trustees. Training, absolutely. So the one thing, again, I would go back, I've just been with my 86-year-old mother who had something come through on her telephone, and I went, Mum, please don't click on that. And I have to say, it's the one thing that absolutely terrifies. But you'd be amazed about how many people are caught out, and it's just getting more and more sophisticated each time, whether it's on your texts or on your emails. Definitely put staff through training, put trustees through training as well to make them aware of it. We working in the professionals have to do it once a year anyway. There is plenty of training out there. And the other thing is, ask whoever your IT providers are of what are the things you could be doing. I'm not an expert in cybercrime, but as a trustee, it worries me. And if I can do anything to reduce and mitigate it, then that's thing you just have to accept. And the other thing I would just say to you is, consider what your disaster recovery plan is if you are attacked. I have a friend of mine who's secretary of, actually, in fact, I shall leave the company nameless, where they've had attack and she's been having to unwind it, and it's probably been the most stressful 4 or 5 months for them as a business, and they're a seriously big tech business that have been hit. So unfortunately, it hits us all. Staff turnover, we talked about, there's been a real, I think for the first time in 30 years, I think the sector is under incredible pressure, and I congratulate you all, those are trustees and also work, for your passion and your work for the sector, because it is much needed, but this is the first time where I've really felt that the sector is under phenomenal pressure, and what that has resulted in is that staff are really feeling that pressure. And again, just as a thought for you, particularly for trustees, and you're probably already doing it, but if you're not, take time to wander around your organisations and go and chat to people and tell them they're doing a good job. We all have a habit, I know at work, of sort of just somebody's working with you and they're doing a fantastic job and we forget to tell them because we think they already know. Sometimes actually just taking them aside and saying, you're doing an amazing job, thank you, we really appreciate it, really makes that difference. And I think just on the morale, and we're also seeing a phenomenal turnover. I was talking to a head of fundraising who said in the last 5 years since COVID, his job has moved from fundraising into a recruitment consultant, because it seems to be every 6 or 9 months her staff are leaving and she's having to recruit in new. And she's a good fundraiser and there's a fantastic organisation, and it's just people are just moving around more often. I think there's a generation that thinks they can learn everything in 9 months and move on to the next thing. But anyway, we can go to that. AI. How many of you are using AI? Now, this is a good story. Excellent. How are you finding AI? Good. What are you using it for? Anybody want to? Sorry? Writing reports. Is that for grant applications? I can tell you as a grant funder, that's become a real problem for us, but that's a different matter. So I tell you, I chair a governance committee, which was newly created for an organisation I'm involved with, and I was asked to write the terms of reference. I have to say, it would have probably taken me half a day. I went on to Copilot. I put in terms of reference for a charity, for governance committee, came up 30 seconds later, and I think I made 5 changes, and it was there. So it is a most powerful tool. And I'll just to give you an example from a business point of view. So we introduced AI into our business, or we've been introducing it in the last 4 years. And the process started, in fact, from our analyst who covers tech, who went to the board and said, listen, we need to be embracing this technology, because if we don't, we're going to be left behind. And I think charities, if you're not embracing it, you should, for that very reason. So we set up a pilot. And we got a number of people in the business to effectively trial it and everything else. And after about 6 months, we then decided to roll it out. I went to Freddie, who had been in charge of the pilot study, and said to him, "What would you have done differently?" And he said, "Well, I wouldn't have had a pilot study, because what we learned at the beginning was irrelevant by the end, because the technology's moved on so fast." But what has been fascinating is having introduced it. Normally an IT project takes about a year to a year and a half to pay back in a month. Productivity gain 20%. So I then turned around to Freddie and said, because I made the assumption that the younger members of staff were going to embrace this technology much more enthusiastic than the older members of staff. I was completely wrong. Anybody who's got an inquisitive mind and is relatively tenacious will embrace this technology. People who will have given it a couple of goes and then find it frustrating, give up, then won't. So you then have to work out, how do you engage those that are not tenacious to do it, because it is really a massive time saving and productivity gains, which if you've got a shortage of cash and the financial things under pressure, this is an amazing way of relieving that. I'm not promising you'll get a 20% productivity gain, but you may be surprised of actually how much time you will save. And the final thing I will say is, certainly from a trustee's perspective, having the meetings recorded and then producing your minutes, and because it's learning iteratively, they just get better and better and better. I've now got a stage where I'm really making very few changes to the minutes that are just automatically being produced. But you can't just assume that they're going to produce them and you don't have to check them. The one thing about AI, it is a tool, it is not the answer, and it doesn't have a brain as such in the way that you use it. So be careful with that. And the final thing I just wanted to, two things I wanted to talk to you about. One is the Association of Chairs. I think somebody asked a question about sort of associations, umbrella. This is not necessarily regional, but again for trustees. How many of you have come across the Association of Chairs? Do you have a view? Anybody have a view on the Association of Chairs? You found it helpful?
I'm not a member, but I find their information quite useful sometimes.
Brilliant, excellent. So two things that I think are happening and changing. I was speaking to Joe Saxon, who's the chair of trustees of the Association of Chairs. Although they're not going to change their name, interestingly, or not at the moment, or indicating, is they're going to broaden it so it's not just for chairs, it's going to be for trustees as a whole, which I think is a really good, because there's no representative body out there that is effectively looking after trustees, and they're going to provide quite a lot more education around what's going on. So I think it's an organisation definitely worth watching. But they did a survey the other day of about 600. Well, in fact, they had 600 respondees. It's worth going and having a look at it. It was a very good, broad cross-section of people, so it wasn't just sort of a biased onto one or some sections. And I think what they were expecting to come back was about paying trustees. There's been a big debate about it. The Charity Commission has been very clear that it's not pro, and I have to say I do side on that side of it, but you can claim legitimate expenses. But actually, as the lowest priorities was paying trustees, and I think the other thing they wanted it to come back was about trustees having qualifications or certification about being a trustee. Thankfully, that also came back low. What did come back, sort of the highest priorities, was diversity and inclusion, a culture of learning, so you can all pat yourselves on the back because you're doing that today. And then the final one was a guide around board behaviour, which obviously I did ask Joe whether Centre Barley had fed into that. He didn't think it had, but obviously I think the things have changed or are changing, particularly where you get a mixture of retired and people are working. One of the problems we're having at the moment is agreeing when meetings should happen to fit into people's agenda, and that I think is going to become an increasing problem. I mean, RL Glassball, where I'm a trustee, when I joined, I think I was the only one working. Today, so this is 10 years later, we've only got one person who's retired. So out of 8 trustees, it has completely reversed. And we've got quite a lot of people who are, I was going to say young female with children. I don't mean to be stereotyping on that, but it's fitting around very much so. They're working and dealing with their families, and schools and feeding and everything else. So it has proven. I don't have a solution to what you do or the magic wand or whatever, but it's something to be aware of and just to really accommodate. The other thing I think is quite interesting is I've just become chair of a charity, and I've completely changed the way board meetings are done. And it just sounds very radical. Being dyslexic, I hate going through papers. It takes me a long time to read. I hate people when they turn up and they haven't read their papers. But rather than going through a process and going through all the reports and all the subcommittees and everything else, I now ring up our chief executive a week before and I say, okay, what are the 3 things we want to talk about? And those go top of the agenda. And if we get through that, then we're happy to go through the process. I tell you what it's done is it has actually turned the meeting, one, into something that's really productive, creative, and you have some really good conversations. So again, if you have meetings that are quite formulaic and you're frustrated by them, feel free to change them because they're an awful lot more fun to do it. And then the final thing, again, going back to issues on financially, charities finding it a bit stretched on money and everything else. The conversation I've probably had more, or as much about investments long term, is about cash management. And I can't remember whether I said something last year to you, but I happened to be talking to a charity last week that sits on, and I know it's a reasonable sum of 6 or 7 million that they've got a project going forward, but their bank was paying them 2.5%. So, very quickly and easily, you can do things that will uplift that. I mean, with Bowel Research UK, where we give grants away each year of somewhere in the region of 700,000-800,000, we've got about 1.8 million sitting on deposit that's going to be paid out in the next 3 years. We've been able to increase the interest by 30 to 50,000 pounds, which means that we've been able to give 2 more grants away just purely by not leaving the money in a bank, but actually going out and doing something with it, which is actually, you've diversified your risk, and you've still got the same amount of liquidity. And you're not taking any more. In fact, if anything, you're taking less risk. And there are things called money market funds, which are professionally managed cash management funds, and there are also common deposit funds, which is exactly the same thing. You've got short-dated gilts, so 2 to 3 years, which are paying you 3.8%. And then there are also short-dated corporate bonds, and again, having a mixture of those. Now, I don't think it really matters how much money you have got. So you could have £50,000, you could have 7 million like this charity I was talking to. You can still make quite a big difference by being creative. What you need to do is be very clear about the purpose of your money. And when I sort of sit down and talk to trustees, I try and get them to think about what the purpose is and what the time frame is. And generally what you have is you've got short term, the cash flow, the bit that sort of keeps the organization going, and that will be a set amount of money. And then you've got money that sits there which you may well look to spend in the next 3 years. And that you still need the capital security, but you have an option of being a little bit more adventurous. Is it? You don't have to have it sitting in the bank account, and you can actually go and place that out on deposit, which could be fixed termed, or it could be into things like money market funds and gilts, etc., where you've got liquidity. And then you've got your long-term investments, which are 5 years plus. As you'll notice, there's a gap there, which is the 3 to 5 years. And unfortunately, that's no man's land. And you have to decide whether it's 3 years or 5 years. But when we're finding raising money, when we're finding getting money out of local authorities, everything else, ever more challenging, if we're not making the most of our existing assets, we really are missing a trick. So I'll just leave you with that final thought, because it's something I've been having conversations with charities on a continuous basis, and it's just very simple without actually taking additional risk. And on that moment, I'm early, I'm going to finish, and I'll just say thank you very much. Hopefully that was helpful.
Thank you, Charles. That gave us quite a lot to think about there. So now I'm going to pick up on our first technical session of the morning. And I forgot my slides there. Here we go. And so I'm going to be talking about the Charity SORP 2026. So after an extensive review and consultation process, the Charity SORP was released at the end of October. So we've had just over 3 weeks to sort of really get into the detail of this. And so this new SORP is based on Financial Reporting Standard FRS 102 and the recent changes that have been applied in that standard. There are significant changes which charities will need to now follow for the accounting and disclosure treatments within their financial statements. So the updated SORP is to ensure that the charity accounting standards remain in line with the broader UK accounting standards. Predominantly, the SORP is offering guidance and explanations for the charities of how to apply that FRS 102 standard. The SORP making committee had the theme of think small first while they were carrying out the consultation, but ultimately they had limited ability to actually protect charities from those changes that come from FRS 102. So this new standard applies to all charities preparing accruals accounts. So depending on your organisation, it may be worth considering for those small organisations what those accruals accounting levels are and whether accruals accounting continues to be the best option for you. So the effective date of the new SORP is the 1st of January 2026. So in practice, if you've got a December year end, your first year end covered by it is 31st of December 2026. For March year ends, March 27, and June year ends, June 27. But what you need to be looking at is that first day of your accounting period. So that 1st of January 2026 is the date at which you will need to be considering your opening balances, whether things need to be restated, and is the date that any additional disclosures within your trustees report will need to cover from. So that really doesn't leave us very much time, a matter of weeks, to get ready for these changes. Alongside the SORP making body have published a summary of changes, which I've linked into the slide, and this highlights which modules have significant, limited or editorial changes. While there's some use to this document, actually some of the modules where it might say there's significant changes, it might be that they've rewritten the module, but actually it contains the same content, or they've separated one module into two. For those of you who would like to review the full 300-page document, I've linked that one in there so you can have a look at the full detail. So one of the key changes within this new SORP is the move to tiered reporting. So previously we had small charities and large charities. Under the 2026 SORP, we now have 3 tiers which are solely based on the income level of the charity. So Tier 1 charities are those smallest charities with gross income of not more than 500,000. Tier 2 are those with gross income of not more than 15 million. And Tier 3 are those with gross income falling above 15 million. So each year, each charity needs to assess their level of income and to determine which tier they fall within. So the idea behind this is to make sure that the reporting is proportionate, the reporting burden is proportionate to the size of the charity, with increased disclosures, the higher tiers that you fall within. For those charitable companies, you need to be careful when considering which tier you fall in and your eligibility to take those disclosure exemptions. So while the SORP is solely based upon the income level of your charity, charitable companies need to consider the Companies Act eligibility. So the size of a company within the Companies Act also takes into account the gross assets and the employee numbers within your charity. So it could be your income falls within Tier 2, but you could be classed as medium or large under the Companies Act, which would prevent you from taking some of the disclosure exemptions. A couple of other considerations are for those non-company charities, there is the option to complete receipts and payments accounts, which takes you outside of accruals accounting and outside of the SORP. At present, that's only for charities whose income doesn't exceed 250,000. There are some new thresholds which have been announced, which are planned to come in from September 2026, which would increase that receipts and payments threshold to 500,000 for those non-company charities. So it's just a consideration of what format of your accounts would be most useful to your users. So these new tiers, you may know, still do not align with the audit thresholds. And the reasoning behind this is that the SORP covers multiple jurisdictions, and each of those jurisdictions set their own audit and examination limits. So, for example, the Scottish audit threshold is lower than the audit threshold in England and Wales, so it wasn't possible to align those tiers with those thresholds. The SORP making body have confirmed that they're committed to considering these tiers further to make sure that they are at the appropriate levels, and there potentially could be a consultation on these levels of tiers as early as 2026. So if we look at how tiering now is going to affect the application of the SORP. So the SORP has 29 modules. This tiering actually only affects 5 of those modules. So these are the Trustees' Annual Report, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit more detail in a moment. The Statement of Financial Activities. This links again with Module 8 and Activity Accounting. Disclosures around trustee and staff remuneration and related parties, and the Statement of Cash Flows. So the Statement of Cash Flows has moved into being a Tier 3 requirement, so therefore only required for those charities with income of over 15 million. However, keep in mind if you're a charitable company, whether you're able to take that exemption. Throughout the SORP, it is highlighted that additional disclosures are always encouraged where these would be relevant to the users of the accounts. So it's not about if you can take the exemption, just take it. It's actually, would you be producing a more informative set of accounts which are more relevant with those additional disclosures included? So I've just put on the screen a snapshot of some of those key areas of change that we've identified over the last couple of weeks of reviewing the SORP, and a lot of those we're going to go through today. So first of all, the trustees' annual report. So there have been significant changes to the trustees' annual report. This module of the SORP has been completely rewritten. The main purpose of the SORP remains the same, of the trustees' annual report remains the same, which is to ensure public accountability and the stewardship of the charity's funds. It's designed to be the narrative reporting, to give context to the financial statements, to explain those figures in words, especially for those people who struggle with the financial statement pages. It's been recognised that this is the module that trustees are most likely to engage with, which is why it's been fully rewritten. And it's highlighted that every trustee should be contributing towards the content of that trustee's annual report. So the tiering applies to this module. However, even with this tiering, the reporting requirements of those smallest Tier 1 charities has substantially increased from the previous SORP. So overall, when you're looking at what needs to be included in your report, you need to ensure that it remains fair, balanced and understandable, even if taking some of the disclosure exemptions as a smaller charity. So I don't like to see the trustees' annual report as a compliance piece. I like to see it's an opportunity for the charity to tell its story and to put into your own words the details of your achievements, your performance, the impact you've made throughout the year. Because if you're not telling anybody about it, nobody's going to know. So it's really an opportunity to be creative with what is included. When you're preparing this report, the things you need to be thinking about are who are the users of the report. So those are your stakeholders. It might be funders, it could be beneficiaries, employees, service users, and what information would be useful for them. It's really clear within the SORP guidance that you can always add more information. So if that additional information is going to make the report more useful, then it should be included. The content included in your trustees report is unique to each organisation. Even if you have two charities with very similar objects and activities, their trustees' annual reports I wouldn't expect to look very similar at all, because they will have had different activities throughout the year. They will have had different challenges that they have faced. So you need to be quite bespoke with what information you're including. So there's now prompt questions included within the SORP to assist trustees with working out what information should be included. It's really clear, though, that these prompt questions shouldn't be seen as a checklist. They should be used as a tool to think about different areas and to think about what information would be relevant to your organisation. So just put a couple of examples on the screen. So it's around looking at how your charity seeks to make differences through its activities, or what criteria does the charity use to assess success in the reporting period. So it's a matter of taking these questions, considering how they apply to your organisation, and then looking at what content would be useful. So the focus throughout the new SORP is really focusing on impact reporting. And this is about explaining that impact that has made a difference to your beneficiaries. But in addition to your beneficiaries, you're required to explain your benefits made to the wider society. So that may be directly to the wider society and the benefits that your charity's brought to the community, or it could be indirectly of the differences that you've made to your beneficiaries and how that itself supports the wider society. There's more focus on explaining the long-term impact of your charity, of what you're doing now, with how that's affecting the future, or where you want to get to. And it's highlighted that potentially inclusion of personal or society-wide impact stories could be included. A number of my clients already do this, and they have service user testimonials and things like that within their reports, which is the way of really showing that impact when you're explaining when the beneficiaries are explaining how you've made a difference to them. There's some new disclosure requirements around fundraising. This is currently only for Tier 3 charities that it's required. And where you have material fundraising, and so material fundraising costs, it's now required to disclose the cost of your fundraising and the impact that that cost has made that cost has had upon generating your fundraising income. So in effect, you're disclosing the net cost of that fundraising and that net income generated. Currently, it's only a requirement for Tier 3 charities. But again, if you have material fundraising and you are smaller than that, it would be sensible to consider whether or not you should be including that as something that your users may wish to see. So it's actually stated within the SORP that the impact your charity has made is arguably the ultimate expression of its performance, which is why explaining the impact to the users is so important. So volunteers. So within the trustees report, there's now some additional disclosures required around volunteers. So some of the disclosures which were later in the financial statements are being pulled back into the trustees report. And this includes explaining the scale and nature of activities of your volunteers. And there's now the requirement to actually define those volunteer roles that are undertaken. For Tier 2 and Tier 3 charities, the contribution of your general volunteers needs to be disclosed, which includes the numbers of your volunteers and the number of those volunteers who supported various activities. It is suggested, but not required, that you may want to include this as the number of hours of volunteering time or the staff equivalent that relates to. As Lexi mentioned earlier in her report, volunteer numbers are falling. And actually, you could see this as an opportunity to show how important volunteers are to your organisation. And that actually, if a huge amount of your work is being undertaken for volunteers, you wouldn't be able to sustain that without them. So in a separate module, in Module 6, there's some specific examples of income recognition in relation to volunteers. So as a reminder, general volunteers is deemed to not be able to be reliably measured, so you shouldn't recognise that as income for your charity. But there now are some specific examples of when potentially you should recognise volunteers as income. Two of those examples within the SORP. One is for a web designer, of where a web designer may create a new website, bespoke website for your organisation on a pro bono basis, where they would normally charge. So it's specifically stated in the SORP that because they would normally charge, you could value that and it should be recognised as a donation and it should be recognised as an expense. Similarly, there is also a statement about independent examinations. So independent examiners. So if you're able to find a pro bono independent examiner who would normally charge, then again, that should be recognised as a donation within your financial statements. So there's some increased reporting requirements around legacies. This only affects Tier 2 and Tier 3 charities. So for those charities who may have received legacies over recent years, you'll be aware that the timing that you recognise the income of the legacy in your financial statements can differ greatly to the time at which that cash is actually received. Sometimes that could potentially be months or years in difference in that timing. So it's now required to include a narrative explanation of how these legacies are included and highlighting when that income is recognised before receipt. This is only required for Tier 2 and 3 charities. However, I would suggest that Tier 1 charities with material legacy should be including it. And this is something that we have been encouraging our clients to be disclosing within their reports previously anyway. It's really important for the understandability of those accounts because you may well have a substantial sum of money being shown as income in your financial statements, but if you haven't got the cash, you're not able to spend it. So the other side of it is you may know you're getting a legacy, and then it hasn't met the recognition criteria yet, but you might have some plans for the future. You might have a big project that you're going to use that to fund. Without this narrative, it wouldn't be clear whether those plans are actually sustainable, and it really would help the understanding for the users of the accounts. So Module 13, I've just noted here, that's got lots of new examples about the timing of legacy recognition, which may be of use. So exemptions. So there's the removal of the requirement to disclose when exemptions have been taken to not disclose names or addresses of key staff and trustees. So this is a welcome update because sometimes if the reason behind not disclosing those names was included, it's been recognised that actually that could increase the risk to those individuals. So continuing with the Trustees' Annual Report and looking at the financial review section. So the financial review is the review of the performance and the position of the charity at the year end. And then so there's some increased reporting required within this. Interestingly, there's now a comment and within the SORP that this must be consistent with the financial statements. I find this interesting because this wasn't in the previous version of the SORP. As an independent examiner, I would always review the trustees' report to make sure it was consistent from that basis. But it's interesting that it wasn't actually a requirement previously. There's new requirements for Tier 2 and Tier 3 charities to disclose information about cyber risks, specifically how those cyber risks relate to your financial performance in the year. And there's a lot more requirement for linking the various sections within your report, so linking that performance in the year to your reserves and your going concern sections, both of which I'm going to mention a bit more in detail now. So the definition of reserves has been updated within the SORP, which is useful because there's lots of questions around what actually is deemed to be the reserves. So the reserves definition is now that they are the funds that are freely available to spend on any of the charity's purposes. There's also now a useful further information explaining what you do and do not include within that. So I'm going to run through that quickly. So to work out your reserves or your free reserves, first of all, you would start with the total funds of your charity. Then you would exclude certain things, so such as fixed assets. So your fixed assets might be is your property, plant and equipment, which is used to carry out your charitable activities. It's now stated that you do exclude investments when they are held for achieving the charity's purposes. So this was an area that was always cloudy of whether you would include or exclude them. So I would take this to mean that if you're a grant-making charity whose purpose is to generate income to grant on to beneficiaries, then these investments are held for your charitable purposes, so they wouldn't form part of your free reserves. You also exclude designated funds where there's a realistic expectation that these will be spent. Any other commitments for expenditure should be excluded. Endowment funds, both permanent and expendable endowment funds, should be excluded, and any of those restricted funds. So once you've taken all of these out, you are left with your reserves or your free reserves. So if we look at how you need to report on your reserves within your trustees report now. So we've just calculated what your reserves level is. What you need to be explaining is what your reserves policy is. So every charity should have a reserves policy. If their policy is to not hold reserves, that's their policy, and that needs to be explained with a justification behind that. But you're required to report in your trustees report what that policy is and what that means in reality, with a monetary figure. Maybe it's most likely going to be a range, but what level of reserves should you be holding and why? You then need to compare your policy to those actual reserves held that you've just calculated. It's now required that, those actual reserves held need to agree to your financial statement. And it's now specifically required that if it's not clearly obvious how those reserves agree to your financial statements, you're now required to include a reconciliation from the financial statements back to that free reserves figure within your trustees report. Then you're going to have your reserves, and you're either going to be right on target if you're lucky, or you're going to more likely have less reserves in your policy or more reserves in your policy. And then you need to be explaining what that means for your organisation. So if you have more reserves in your policy, it may well be that you've got a project that's delayed, so you've got expenditure commitments coming up, so you need to be explaining that, yep, we've got a bit more money than we planned to, but this is what we are doing with it because the projects are just slightly behind. The other side of things, if your reserves are slightly lower than your policy, it might be because you've got material designations or restricted funds, which means that you don't actually need to hold all of the reserves required in your reserves policy as free reserves, because some of those restricted funds are going to contribute to those activities. If your actual reserves are below your policy, it's now required to include the steps that you are taking to bring them back in line with your policy. And this should be linked to your going concern section. So if your reserves are below your policy, you need to be explaining why you feel that you are still a going concern, so that the users can understand what you are doing to get back to that position. And this again should link to that plans to future section of the actual activities that you are planning to undertake in the coming years. Plans for future now is now required for all tiers, previously only being required for larger charities, which I feel is really important because it can show what's coming next for your organisation. So a new section of reporting within the trustees report is ESG reporting, so environmental, social and governance reporting. So these environmental, climate-related risks and opportunities. Social could be to do with employee engagement, diversity, inclusion, and governance would be that cybersecurity, ethics, and things like that. So for tier 3 charities, they need to explain how the charity is responding to and managing environmental, governance, and social matters. Tier 1 and 2 charities, reporting is only optional at this stage, but you need to consider the needs of your stakeholders. If you're an environmental charity, I would suggest that you're probably including some environmental reporting within your report, because that is what your users are going to be interested in. This is another area where if you are a charitable company, you need to consider if you're also meeting this definition of small under the Companies Act, because ESG reporting is required for medium and large companies. If you haven't looked at ESG reporting yet and you're thinking you might need to because you're going to fall within it, just as a tool, somewhere that you may want to start, the United Nations adopted their 17 Sustainable Development Goals back in 2015. I'm not saying that you need to focus on all of these, but it could be a good starting point to looking at what their main goals are and what might align with your organisation. So overall, the trustees' annual report now requires significant additional information. And the Tier 1 reporting has seen quite a heavy burden of this. So what do you need to be doing now? What you need to be doing is looking at what systems you have in place to be able to collate this information. If you've got a December year end and you're needing to disclose specific volunteer numbers, you need to be capturing that information from the 1st of January. What you also need to be considering is how the SORP as a whole is affecting your financial statements. Because within your next set of financial statements, so again for December year end, within your December 2025 financial statements, you should be disclosing the impact that the SORP is expected to make on the coming year's financial statement. And for those who might be impacted upon by the income recognition and lease changes, which Lexi's going to cover shortly, you need to be aware of what that impact's going to be, so you can include that within your trustees' annual report. So overall, the SORP Making Committee considered that the reporting requirements are proportionate, these changes, even with this additional information. Their view is that they would expect that all of this information would already be available to charity trustees in order to govern your charity appropriately. So moving on to another module, we have social investments. So social investments is a new term in the 2026 SORP, and this is replacing mixed motive and programme-related investments. Those terms are being retired and replaced with social investments. So this aligns with the updates in the Charities Act. So a social investment is an investment which may or may not have a financial return and is also to further charitable purposes. So when considering if an investment is a social investment, judgment is needed. So is it a social investment, or is it actually a grant or a donation? So you need to take judgment as to, especially where the financial return is considered to be very low or very unlikely, then should it be better deemed to be a grant or a donation? There's some changes in how impairment losses will be reported on these social investments. So previously they were included within investment losses. It's been recognised that actually because these investments are to further the charitable purposes, they would be better, it's more appropriate to include them as charitable expenditure. Gains remain within other income, there's no change there. So for Tier 2 and Tier 3 charities, within your trustees' annual report, you need to explain how these social investments have contributed to the achievements of your charity. And there are some useful clarifications within the SORP about the types of benefit that can be considered a return on the investment. So it may be income or capital gain, as you would expect. It could be purely the return of that initial investment, or it could be where a guarantee is given as the investment, that the guarantee not being taken up could be considered as the return. There's also some clearer guidance on loans to trading subsidiaries where they're helping deliver charitable objects, and how when the charity is retaining control, they actually have control over return of those funds. So for those charities who have the power to adopt the total return on investment approach, there's been changes to align to the Charities Act in relation to funding social investments. So if you have the power, you are able to fund social investments through total return on investment fund. But there are some certain criteria for this, because if there's a negative or uncertain return, this needs to be offset by losses elsewhere in the fund. So there's some new disclosures required around those areas, including showing the amount invested in any such social investment, amount of the return, the amount of any loss, and explaining the offset of those losses. So for those Tier 1 charities, this isn't a change, but there's been some more detailed clarification on this, but there is the option to prepare the natural statement of financial activities. Now, this means that you can prepare a more simplified and customised statement of financial activities, and instead of having to follow the specific headings, specifically for expenditure, charitable activity expenditure, and listing your activities and costs of generating funds, then you can actually simplify this, including just salary costs, premises costs, grants made, and having those shown on the face of your SOFA if that is most useful to your accounts. So this is only available for charities who fall within Tier 1. And if you take this option, it is deemed to be a change in accounting policy. Therefore, it's not a simple thing to do to switch in and out of year on year. So it should only be considered if you know you're going to stay within that Tier 1 for a substantial period of time, and that you're happy with that reporting going forwards. Some other areas to briefly mention. So there's heritage assets. If you have heritage assets, there's more clarity on the measurement of those donated assets, and some updates to the disclosure requirements. So it's worth taking a look or speaking to your advisors if you have those. For disclosures, there's some more clearer information on disclosures. So it's now clear that former related parties, if they had related party transactions during the period which they were a related party, though it's clarified that those must be disclosed within the financial statements. There's also some changes to key management personnel disclosures. So where your key management personnel may have only been employed for part of the period, that length of employment should be disclosed within that note to add a bit more clarity to explain those figures. It's also noted that those Tier 2 and Tier 3 charities may wish to disclose their key management personnel remuneration on an individual basis. However, it's not a requirement. So just a couple of tax updates. There's not really very many tax updates at the moment. There might be later today. But last year I was here and I was talking about the charity tax consultation that was in progress. So the draft legislation has been published. So this covers changes covered tainted donations where the donor might receive financial assistance, and making those taxable if financial assistance is provided to the donor. Approved charitable investments is being extended so that all investments charities make need to be for charitable purposes and not for the avoidance of tax. Attributable income, that term is now including legacies. What this does is means that if legacies are not spent on charitable purposes, it gives HMRC the power to make those taxable. And HMRC are also looking at sanctions for failure to meet tax obligations to force charities to make sure that they're complying. If enacted, this legislation is going to take place, will come into force from April 2026. These don't really seem like huge changes because if you are complying as a charity, they shouldn't impact you at all. But what is interesting is that these changes are expected to bring in £20 million to the Treasury during 26-27 and £35 million a year thereafter. So next, the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act. So this relates to all charitable companies who are registered with Companies House. And so as a reminder, trustees of charitable companies are also statutory directors. So there are new ID requirements required for all directors of UK companies, and this came into force from the 18th of November. This wasn't a hard deadline, but in practice, you have up to 12 months to comply with this. The requirement is for all directors to electronically verify their identity. This can either be directly with Companies House through their website or through an authorised service provider. We've been supporting a lot of our clients with this. But what you need to keep in mind is that before you submit your next annual confirmation statement with Companies House, all of your directors have to have their IT verified and have received their ID codes, because those codes need to be submitted to Companies House along with that confirmation statement. So it's worth checking the date of your next confirmation statement to make sure that you are able to comply. Companies House filings, and so linked with the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act. So from April 2027, all companies will need to file their accounts electronically with Companies House. So paper and web-based options will be closed. And this is for charitable companies as well. So all accounts will need to be filed using commercial software, which will result in iXBRL tagging. So applying to all charitable companies. We've been talking to our software provider to work out how this is going to work in practice. Not sure at the moment yet, but we will keep all of your charitable companies updated on what that's going to look like for you. As far as I know, there's no plans at the moment for this to go across to the Charity Commission as well, but we don't know what the future is going to look like. And then finally, Charities Act 2022, there's some more changes due to come into force from tomorrow. And so this is in relation to how charities make ex gratia and moral payments. These changes will allow trustees to delegate decision-making and authority for moral payments, perhaps to members of staff or trustee subcommittees. And some of these payments are able to be made without commission authority. The reason for the delay in this section was in relation to statutory institutions, because they've been excluded. So this is relevant national museums and galleries, to prevent them being able to return artefacts. So that brings us to the end of our first technical session and to a coffee break. A moral payment. So a moral payment. So I'll give it an example of why statutory institutions are excluded. So if you think about, if you go into the British Museum and they have all of the marbles and things like that, should they be in the UK or should they be returned to Athens? So there's that argument that actually that could be classed as a moral payment, that those assets should be returned to their home countries, which is why they've been excluded from this update at the moment. Okay, so that takes us on to our coffee break. So we're going to break for 15 minutes. For those of you at home, we will have a timer on the screen so you'll know when we're due back to start. The coffee is over at the side of the room, so you don't need to go downstairs now. Oh.
Sorry to ask you that.
Oh no, questions are at the end. Oh no, I thought I was going to get a coffee.
That was excellent. Thank you for covering that so well.
Thank you. Lexi's got the harder job, isn't it?
I'm going to take that after coffee.
After coffee, yeah.
The biggest ex gratia dilemma at the moment is the Church of England's proposal to set up a fund for slavery reparations. So the funding that went into the Queen Anne's bounty, should that actually, as a result of it coming in from slavery, should they do that? So they're proposing hundreds of millions for reparations for that.
But now we're only
I want to give people to.
well, we still don't. Yeah. Can I encourage everyone to start taking their seats so we can start again in a moment?
All right, everybody, I think if I can ask you to all take a seat. If I can ask everybody to take a seat, I think we're ready to make a start. Gents, Richard, can you turn me up a little bit? Can I ask everybody to take a seat? Gents at the back, may I ask you to, I think we're ready to make a start. Right, fantastic. Okay, I think we are good to go. Thank you very much, everyone. I did actually want to give everybody the opportunity to get a coffee before we started this session. We have genuinely scheduled this session for after the coffee break because it is another technical update. And so I will ask you to bear with me a little bit. There are some significant technical changes in the SORP. I'm going to do my best to explain those in a non-technical language, but it was very purposefully scheduled for once everyone had had the opportunity to fuel up on more caffeine and pastry. So I hope everyone has taken the opportunity to do so. One of the questions we were asked actually before the seminar was somebody simply said, please can you explain the new SORP? So we're going to do our best, and perhaps we'll have a show of hands at the end as to whether we've achieved that or not. But that's very much our objective. But please do bear with me because some of it does need some explaining, actually, in fairness. And I think probably my overriding message, if there's anything you're not sure about, is to take advice from your accountants or advisors because there are some technical areas. Okay, so before we go into the new SORP, though, I did want to touch on a government response to a consultation which was published on the same day. So this was also published on the 31st of October. This was the DCMS response to a consultation which was issued earlier in the year. And the consultation was looking at financial thresholds in charity law. So the Charities Act 2011 includes a number of financial thresholds, and those thresholds govern the accounting and reporting and auditing requirements for charities. So there was a consultation earlier in the year about the need to review those thresholds. They were actually last reviewed in 2015, so this was 10 years ago. And there is an ongoing recommendation that they're reviewed every 10 years. So they have now been reviewed, and this was the government response to that consultation that was published on the same day. So if we have a look at those thresholds and what they are and why they're relevant, most of them are based around the income of your charity. Your income may change with some of these new SORP requirements. We'll touch on those in a minute, but they're based around your income. The first requirement at the moment is for the accounts of your charity to be subject to what's called an independent examination. At the moment, that's required for charities with income above 25,000. Under the response to the consultation, that threshold has increased or will be increasing to 40,000. There's then an additional requirement for your independent examiner to be what's termed a qualified examiner. That means that they are a member of a recognised accountancy profession. That requirement applied previously to any charities with income over 250,000. Going forward, that threshold is increasing to income of £500,000. Now, personally, I'd caveat this quite strongly. There are some really technical changes coming down the line in the new SORP. Personally, for me, relying on somebody who isn't a qualified accountant to undertake an examination of your charity's accounts comes with a few risks, given the technicality of some of these changes. So even if you are able to adopt this increased threshold and not do so, you may choose to continue to use a qualified independent examiner, or perhaps use them for the first year under the new SORP and then consider not doing so thereafter. Sarah's touched on this threshold earlier. There's also a threshold. This only applies to charities which are not also companies. So if you're a charitable trust or a CIO, you're able to prepare accounts under what's called a receipts and payments basis. This is a very simplified approach to accounts, where you simply record the money you've received into your bank account during the year and the payments going out. Very simplified. If you're not a company, your charity may adopt this basis of accounting. At the moment, that's for charities of income up to 250,000. Going forward, that will increase to £500,000. Now, what I want to highlight, those receipts and payments accounts are not prepared in accordance with the SORP. So if you don't like many of the things and changes I'm about to talk about, you might want to think about this if it is an option for your charity, as these are not SORP compliant accounts, receipts and payments, so that you can disregard these other changes within the SORP if this applies to you. Not available for any charitable companies, I'm afraid, though. So the audit thresholds then for charities, if your income is over £1 million, you require an audit currently. Going forward, that's increasing to 1.5 million. There is another threshold which is often overlooked, which also triggers an audit requirement for charities. That looks at both your income and your gross assets. So not your balance sheet total, your gross assets, the total of all of the assets in your charity. Currently, that's £250,000 for income and 3.26 million for assets, and that's increasing to £500,000 and 5 million respectively going forward. Lastly, then, the requirement to prepare group accounts. So this is consolidating results of any trading subsidiaries that you may have, preparing group accounts. Currently, that's for charities with income, or charities and groups with income over £1 million. Going forward, that's increasing to 1.5 million. Now, what it's important to note that what was announced on the 31st of October was purely the government's response to the consultation and the new thresholds that they plan to introduce. Because these thresholds are set out in charity law, it will require a statutory instrument to amend them. And the intention is that that will be placed before Parliament next year in 2026. As a result, these thresholds aren't expected to take effect, or I've got a little bit of feedback, Richard, until financial years ending 30th of September 2027. So a few years off. The idea of announcing them now, ostensibly, was for charities to be aware of them and become familiar with them, but please don't jump the gun. They're not available yet, and we will obviously keep you informed as to when they become available, and those dates are confirmed in due course. Okay, so moving on then to the Charity SORP 2026, and Sarah very kindly covered some of the updates around disclosures and trustees' annual report. I'm going to cover some of the changes that could impact the numbers within your accounts in my session. But just to recap on Sarah's slides, the SORP is based on Financial Reporting Standard FRS 102, and that standard has included a number of changes which the SORP is required to adopt. It's not within the scope of the SORP-making body to make any changes to that standard and the requirement of that standard. So essentially all the SORP is able to really do in relation to these key changes is to provide some additional guidance and explanations for charities. And as I mentioned, and as Sarah mentioned, this SORP will apply to all charities preparing accruals accounts. So these changes will affect you, the ones I'm going to talk about, irrespective of your tier or size. If you're preparing SORP accounts, you need to think about these changes and how they impact you. Sarah's already touched on the effective dates. What I would say is the two key areas I'm going to talk about, which are changes to income recognition and leases. There's what's called, it's quite a complicated term, a modified retrospective approach allowed for those, which means that what you do is apply those changes to the first financial year from your adoption of the SORP. So if you're a December year end, you'd apply those changes to 2026, but there is not a requirement to restate 2025. So you'll have 2 years which look different within your financial statements, but you do need to assess the position at the first date you adopt the new standard. So if you're a December year end, that's going to be the 1st of January 26, so really quite soon. And I know a lot of charities use a March year end, so you're going to be talking the 1st of April 26. So moving on then to the first change. Bear with me, I hope everyone's still awake, keep going. Income. Okay, so under the new SORP, there are now 2 broad categories of income. And just as a reminder, this will apply to all charities, but also it comes from FRS 102. So if you have a trading subsidiary, it's going to apply to them as well because they'll be reporting under FRS 102. So this really captures everybody unless you're not preparing SORP accounts. There's no exemptions from this based on your size. So 2 categories of income. The first is what's called exchange transactions. So the concept here is that you are receiving that income, and in exchange, your charity is doing something in return. There is an exchange transaction, and what you're doing in return is in broadly equal value to the income that you are receiving. A good example would be perhaps a local authority contract, where a charity is receiving money to deliver services. That might be residential care, that might be other care or medical services, almost in some cases on behalf of the local authority. That would be a typical exchange transaction. The other category then, is non-exchange income. So this is income which is given freely, without the expectation of anything being received in return necessarily, or if something is received in return, it's not of an equal value. An example here would be a public donation. Those are obviously freely given. There's no expectation on behalf of the donor of getting anything back in return. An area which is likely to cause some complexity will be grants. Sometimes grants grant donors do ask for things in return. And the key question here will be, is that receipt, is the service that they're receiving in return, is that of equal value to the income that's being received? And if it is, it would be an exchange transaction. And if it's not, it will fall into non-exchange transactions. So some care needed when looking at any grants. Now, the reason this is important is that there are different recognition and accounting criteria for those two categories of income. So all charities will need to understand the nature of the income that they're receiving and be able to categorize it within or between these two categories. And obviously that will vary on an income by income stream. Please don't shoot the messenger on these. Okay, so starting with non-exchange transactions then, because arguably these are the simpler of the two categories now. So having identified we have some non-exchange income, on the whole we're not doing something in return, or if we are, it's not of an equal value. The SORP then says we need to are there any, and this is SORP terminology, what's termed performance-related conditions attached to that income. So to give a bit of a steer as to what those are, what we're looking for is something where there is a close specification, quite a detailed specification of something that the charity is going to do. The receipt of that money is going to be conditional on the charity undertaking that service or performing that activity. And the amount payable is going to be determined by the extent to which that has been performed. So an example might be, okay, here's a grant for £50,000. Actually, it's not purely unconditional. We want you to do these couple of things in return, or we want you to run these courses or classes. The extent to which all those events have been run, that then determines when you can recognise that activity. So if there are no performance-related conditions attached to the income you've received, that income is recognised when it is receivable. Now, that is quite different to when it's received. So if you have a 3-year funding agreement, unless there are specific performance-related conditions, you would be recognised, or other conditions which we'll touch on, you recognise that from the outset. And this has been a real challenge for charities in recent years, because very often that's resulting in income being recognised before the monies are actually received. If there are performance-related conditions attached to that income, you then recognise that income when those performance-related conditions are met. So if you've got a number of courses that you're running, events that you're running, you need to track the delivery of those and recognise your income in line with that output being performed. There are a couple of other conditions which can limit income recognition, and those include conditions outside of the charity's control. So, for example, if you get £50,000 of grant funding, but it's subject to obtaining match funding, the ability to obtain match funding is outside of the control of the charity, so you don't recognise that income until you obtain that match funding. There may be time conditions attached to income as well. However, and this is another key point, those conditions or those terms need to specify when the funds can be used, not when they will be received. And again, this is quite an important nuance. Sometimes charities say, I've got a 3-year funding agreement, I'm going to get these funds in later years. Well, unless that agreement specifically says you cannot use those funds until later years, you would still be recognising them all up front. So there's going to be a real need to consider these very closely. That's the non-exchange transactions. So we'll move, actually I forgot about legacies. So legacies is an example, a really good example to be fair, of non-exchange income. It's not generally given in expectation of anything in return. There is some more information in the new SORP around these and some more examples and guidance. I tend to agree with Sarah. I think a lot of this was things that we were already doing anyway. So the SORP explains that you might have some valuations attached to legacies. There may be a dispute. You would look at materiality, etc., etc. But actually, to be honest, these were things we were considering already. So there isn't really a material shift in terms of accounting for legacies under the new SORP. It's very similar to the existing requirements. There's just some more guidance there. What I would note is that a legacy may come attached with a restriction as to how those funds can be spent. That is not a performance-related condition under the SORP. That's just specifying how the money can be spent. So that doesn't affect how it's recognised other than how it's categorised within the accounts. Okay, bear with me, we'll keep going. Exchange transactions then. So this is income where charities are receiving something or providing something, in exchange. Okay, so if that transaction is all completed within your financial year and you've had an agreement, you're going to do something and you provide that exchange activity within the year, great. You don't need to worry too much about this. Where this becomes complicated is where there is an agreement or an arrangement which spans your financial year. And in those scenarios, you need to think about how that impacts your income recognition. From a charity's perspective, you may therefore want to consider when your financial year ends and how that aligns with any agreements with your key funders and service providers, because aligning those two as much as possible will be helpful going forward. But if, for example, you've got a multi-year either funding or service or contract agreement, and that's ongoing and spans the financial year, then this will apply. And the same holds true for obviously your trading subsidiaries. So any membership subscriptions, any access to museums arrangements, whatever that might be, if those span a financial year, then these requirements will kick in. So the new requirements require for exchange transactions for us to apply what's called the 5-step recognition model. This requires us to identify the contract. So this isn't just written contracts. This might be a verbal agreement. This might be a sale in a charity shop, for example, but there's a transaction there where you are doing something in exchange. Having identified that, there's a need to then identify, well, what is the charity doing in return? What are my performance obligations? Now, that might sound simple, but if, for example, you've got an operation where you've said, okay, well, I'm going to grant you access, you buy your annual membership. And that annual membership includes access perhaps to the gardens, but it might include discounted teas and coffees in the coffee shop. It might include a discount in the bookstore. All of those are separate performance obligations under the new standard, and they all need to be individually identified. And perhaps if we keep with that example, having identified the price then that's been paid for that price needs to be allocated against each of those performance obligations. That revenue is then recognised when that performance obligation is fulfilled. So there's a need to understand, is that fulfillment at a point in time? So it might be a sale transaction. Is it over a period of time? For example, access to a venue, warranties, etc., etc., etc. Bearing in mind this will apply to trading subsidiaries as well. The SORP recognises that this can be very complex and actually refers users back to the full Financial Reporting Standard 102 for guidance where it's needed. Now, I think I can only agree. This is complex. For those of you whose charities are subject to audit, it also needs to be auditable. So I would advise you to consider the impact this could have on your organisation early and engage with your advisors. The new requirements will apply to any income contracts, agreements, etc., which are not completed on implementation. So for those of you with a December year end, that could be as early as the 1st of January next year. Now, I've already spoken to a number of charities who don't consider that these changes apply to them. However, when you look at the detail of their income streams, very often they do. And it would be much easier to capture this at the outset than try to identify this information retrospectively. So we've not gone through a detailed explanation, but I have, and will circulate these slides around, gone through a checklist that you can work through in terms of identifying all of your income streams and categorising them between these two categories, then considering whether there's any performance-related conditions, considering any contracts which might span that implementation date, and mapping them using that 5-step model. Because this is income, it can also affect those financial thresholds we talked about at the outset, which are all based on income. And there's a need, obviously, to update your accounting policies within the accounts, but also the disclosures related to this. Now, the old SORP, I won't go into the detail on the disclosures, the old SORP had 4 sentences regarding disclosures for revenue, one of which was an accounting policy. The new SORP has 3 pages, and they are extensive. And it's an area which I think hasn't been particularly well announced or shared, but there's a lot more work there needed and a lot more complexity around this. So my main advice, I think, really would be to engage early with your advisors. So that's revenue. I was just stunned silence across the room and a few frowns I can see already. We'll move on to leases then. I'm going to keep going. I like a challenge. So there's a whole new section in the SORP on leases, section 10B. And again, as with the other areas, this is clarifying what the requirements are for charities, providing some examples of situations that charities might encounter. There's recognition by the SORP making body that these lease changes will also be difficult to implement. And I thought there was some very interesting language used in the explanatory notes where the SORP making body said it was not within the gift or not within their gift to override any of the requirements for FRS 102, which I thought was interesting use of language. But anyway, the SORP also highlights the exemptions which are available from applying these new lease accounting requirements. Now, it's the first time I've ever seen an accounting standard that starts with the exemptions. Before you even get to the definition of leases, it's kind of telling you how you can avoid it. So we'll do the same, but I think even that in itself was quite interesting. So, exemptions. If you have a short-term lease, something that has less than 12 months to run from the outset, that's from the commencement date, there's an exemption available there. There's a transitional exemption. Oh, my slides have gone. If there are 12 months left at the date of implementation, so 1st of January 26. There are some other criteria which need to be met. So again, speak to your accountants if you think that might apply. The next exemption is if the lease is the underlying asset is of a low value. So FRS 102 explains that this would not be a car, a van, or land and building. SORP goes a little bit further. It's a little bit more helpful and does provide some examples of what it might be. Those include phones, personal computers, small items of office equipment. There are some other criteria which you need to meet as well. So again, worth taking advice. If these exemptions don't apply and you do have a lease agreement, then you will be into the realms of the new lease accounting requirements. So, to summarise these, at the moment you have a concept of a finance lease, which is generally something where you've got a big item of plant and equipment, perhaps a vehicle on a finance, long leasehold property. Those are accounted for by including an asset on your balance sheet and a corresponding liability. We also have a concept of an operating lease. Those are typically items of equipment or perhaps a short-term property lease. Those are quite simply accounted for at the moment. You just recognise those rentals when you pay them. Under the new SORP, the concept of an operating lease kind of evaporates, really. It pretty much disappears, and we move to a single model for lease accounting, unless any of those exemptions apply. So what that means is we're going to be bringing onto our balance sheet assets and liabilities for any of these leases that were previously what's called off balance sheet. So to try and give an example of that then, from an asset perspective, you end up with what's called a right of use asset. So you have to identify the cost of that somewhat theoretical asset, which includes things like the lease liability, but any costs of obtaining the lease, any dilapidations, etc., etc. You then carry that asset at cost, less depreciation in later years. So your balance sheets, under those physical assets, which we can probably all get our head around a little bit easier, you're now going to have a right of use asset. And that will apply, as we say, from the first year of adoption. There isn't a requirement to restate the prior year, so it will look like that. You'll have an asset suddenly appearing on your balance sheet. From a liability perspective, you'll then also have a liability. Now, that that liability is not the total payments due under the lease. That would be far too easy. Instead, we have to calculate the present value of those payments using an interest rate. The SORP that I can see, Jackie, I can see you sighing. I think it's summing up the room, that's okay. We have to calculate that present value using an interest rate, and the SORP gives some guidance on what the most appropriate interest rate might be. Having done that, then you'll then have those lease liabilities coming onto your balance sheet. The current liabilities, obviously those due within 12 months, and non-current being those due thereafter. Now, if I perhaps provide a little, very short working example of what that looks like in practice, if you had a charity shop, and actually this will disproportionately affect charities which have a large number of charity shops, because suddenly all of those liabilities come onto the balance sheet. So say you're paying £10,000 a year for your charity shop rental, £50,000, you've got a lease term of 5 years. You calculate the present value of that £50,000. So you take into account the time value of money using that interest rate, which you've agreed with your auditor. And that balance is the figure that then goes onto your balance sheet as being the liability. And then on an annual basis, you add interest. So you apply your 4%, you deduct your payment, and then you have another figure on there, which arguably nobody kind of really recognises, and it's hard to understand, but there we go, don't shoot the messenger. So that's kind of how it looks in practice. So there are some specific examples which are relevant to the charity sector, which the SORP touches on. The first of those is peppercorn leases. So the SORP recognises that these take the legal form of a lease, because of course they do. However, and this is super helpful, they are unlikely to meet the definition of a lease under the financial reporting standard, and that is because the definition says a lease requires consideration, a payment in return. If there's no payment, technically you're not a lease under the definition of the standard, so you fall outside the scope. Great news. So if you do have your £1 or peppercorn payment, that just goes through your accounts as paid as is. However, there's another but. Under the SORP, you need to consider the benefit that you are receiving, because you're getting something. You need to identify what it is that you're getting. Is it an asset? Is it a service? Or is it a facility? If it's an asset, you need to ascertain the fair value of that asset and recognise it. If it's a facility or service, you need to identify the value to the charity and recognise that within your account. So it's not a complete get-out-of-jail-free card for peppercorn leases. The other type of leases we commonly see in the sector are social donation leases. This is where charities may be making payment for their leases, but those are below market rate, but higher than a nominal amount, generally due to there being a philanthropic intention on the part of the lessor. Under the SORP, those leases include a non-exchange component. That bit, the difference between the market rate and the rate you're paying, that's non-exchange income under these requirements. So again, have you received an asset, a service, or a facility for that gap between the market rate and the rate that you're paying? You'll need to recognise that as an income and an asset within your accounts. Again, I provided a checklist here for leases. My strongest, I think, advice would be to take advice if you think any of this could apply to you. It's not just legally drafted leases. It can be a verbal agreement. It can be agreement in principle. The definition of leases is quite broadly drafted. So there's a real need to consider whether this could apply to your charity. And if it does, I would encourage you to take advice at an early stage. Another change that I wanted to highlight, which Sarah has mentioned earlier, is the statement of cash flows. Currently, those are required for any charities with income over £500,000. Going forward in the SORP, the requirement will only apply to charities with income over 15 million. However, there are requirements within FRS 102 which can drive the need for a cash flow statement unless you qualify as a small company under the Companies Act. Quite a few different places to look at for the thresholds. However, the point I wanted to make is actually that if you are no longer required to prepare a statement of cash flows, If it were me, I'm not sure I'd be jumping at that opportunity. So let's just think about all of the financial challenges and what's happening in the sector as a whole. Think about the complexity in your income statement and SOFAs now, where you have income coming in that hasn't yet been received, you have fair value adjustments, you have lease adjustments, you have all of this complexity around lease accounting. For me, the cash flow statement is one of the simplest sections to understand in your financial statement. It starts with your money in the bank. It looks at what you've received physically by way of cash that year, what you have physically spent in cash that year, and what your closing balance is. For me, having that information is fundamental to running your charity, and actually very often provides a much better and clearer way to understand the transactions than your income statement might do. So if you're not going to prepare this in your financial statements, I'd be encouraging you to make sure you still have this information available, because I do think it is quite key for charities and charity leaders to have access to. So I've put up a bit of a SORP action plan. This is really very much for you guys to take away, to have a think about considerations from a governance and planning perspective, briefing trustees, for example, identifying your implementation and reporting dates, assessing your income, considering leases, considering the trustees' annual report changes, which Sarah has highlighted. I think key for me is training for your finance staff, potentially for budget holders, for trustees, engaging with your auditors, examiners, accountants, working out who's going to do what. If you've got some good accountants and they're going to work this out for you, great, but they'll only be able to help so far with income. There's a lot of information you'll need to be able to gather yourselves. And also communicating where it's appropriate with stakeholders and external the third parties who are reviewing your accounts, users of your accounts. Some of these will result in some material changes for charities. So a lot to think about. I've tried to cover it at a very high level. It is some real technical stuff. Sarah, myself, and all of the team will be around for the rest of the day and obviously available outside of that as well. So do feel free to nab us with any questions. I think my lasting piece of advice would be to take advice because there are some real technical changes here. And it's very easy to think, actually, no, that won't apply to me. That won't apply to me. On the whole, the way it's drafted, it applies to most charities that we deal with. So that's everything from me. I think I've kept everyone awake. I've done my best. I'm now going to pass over to Ben from Quilter Cheviot. Ben is a investment manager at Quilter Cheviot, but specialises in charities, and he's going to touch on some of the updates from the investment sector over the last year. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So my name is Ben Deedon. I'm one of the investment managers and one of the regional charity specialists working out of Quilter Cheviot's office in Bristol. So I thought I'd come along and talk today about, well, basically a year in review. It's been, obviously we're 11 months through the year so far, and it's been quite a topsy-turvy year. I think if you look at all of the sort of the news headlines and everything that you hear, you'd probably think the markets have had a tough time, but where we are today is it's looking quite good in terms of sort of charity returns and sort of just wider investment market returns. Things actually look quite good. So I'm just going to set through sort of the major market sort of moving events that we've had so far. So we came into the year, Trump was his inauguration, and well, I think coming into the year, so the mood music was pretty good, sort of like him or lump him. Trump was deemed from his previous sort of tenure was seen as being good for markets. It's all about sort of cutting taxes, lining the pocket of the American consumer, and if there's one thing they're good at, it's spending money, and that should sort of translate to hopefully sort of growth. We then had DeepSeek, sort of an announcement. So I'm not sure whether you've heard of ChatGPT. Is a company sort of ran by a sort of model ran by a company called OpenAI. DeepSeek is essentially the Chinese version of that. They came out and announced this DeepSeek model at the end of January, and sort of threw sort of cat amongst the pigeons, because originally it was deemed that to succeed in this sort of space, the AI space, you had to be spending billions and billions of pounds, and it was going to be the biggest players were going to be the ones that succeed. DeepSeek came out and sort of said that they actually produced a large language model at a fraction of the cost of what OpenAI had done. So it I think it scared sort of investors, because I think we'd been sort of buying into these large AI sort of tech companies, thinking that they're going to be the ones that succeed. And then DeepSeek came out and said, actually, you could do it for a fraction of the cost. So maybe this moat that originally had been built up was no longer there. Obviously, the information coming out of China, I think we had to take it with a pinch of salt. And I think sort of looking into it, wasn't actually as cheap as they initially said, and it probably wasn't anywhere near as good. So thankfully, despite when it was announced, Nvidia, which is one of the large US tech stocks, was down sort of 12% on a day, experiencing the biggest fall in Wall Street history. So they wiped, I think it shed sort of their market cap, is about similarly the size of Tesla, was wiped off their company size in one day. When the news came out that sort of DeepSeek wasn't as good, we were back at the races, and sort of tech stocks continued again. And then Trump decided that he's going to introduce the tariffs. And I think we were expecting them. I think we weren't expecting them to be probably as sort of aggressive as they were. And he obviously slapped 45% tariffs on pretty much all countries. The UK got away with it. We only had 10%. But this had a sort of major effect on markets. And you saw markets just on one day sort of down 5%. He continued with it. I think what we expected, he would bend and he would sort of step back, walk back on it. That didn't happen for 7 days, and it was getting a little bit tetchy, because I think we were thinking that as soon as he starts to see the market falling, as he's done in the past, he'd be like, "Oops, sorry, made a mistake there," and then dial it down. But he stuck with it for 7 days, and then he paused, and I think that was sort of a good sign to us that probably we've got the Trump that we expected. It's the one that sort of will sort of try and crack a nut with a sledgehammer, and then realise actually that's probably not the way of doing it. So he paused. The S&P 500, which is the US index, was up 12% in a day. Bigger than, sort of to put it into context, it's bigger than the announcement of the COVID vaccine, sort of the spike that we saw there. So this was obviously well received by markets. We have then got, don't think it's going to come up. Oh, there he is. So then we then got sort of, this is basically an illustration of a bull market. Ever since then, markets have done incredibly well, and obviously there's been a bit of volatility along the way, but general trajectory has been good for markets. One other slight concern that we're seeing at the moment is the sort of the attacks on the Fed. So Trump is sort of going after Jerome Powell, and he's going after Lisa Cook. And I think the concern for us is that you want a central bank to be independent. You don't want it to become sort of politicized, because there's very different view or sort of interests when it comes to sort of a country's monetary policy, because the Fed are the one that determine interest rates. So Trump wants interest rates as low as he can get them. He's screaming for 1%. We're now at 4%. So they've got a long way to travel. He's trying to do everything he can to get the people that are in the central bank on his side. And it's not working just yet. So I think we saw sort of concern in the bond market, a little bit of a wobble, but equity markets have pretty much ignored it. I suppose the main concern that we're seeing now is the question of, are we in a tech bubble? So are these sort of big AI stocks, are they overvalued? Are they overpriced? And I've got a few slides. I will try and answer that. I'll try not to sit on the fence too much with that. And left a question mark there because obviously we've got a month left, and hopefully we get a sort of Santa rally throughout December, but who knows? So this is essentially just a quick chart just to show the S&P 500. So this is the US index, so the large 500 companies in the US. This is just year to date. So as you can see, the big four, that's the tariffs, and then recovery since then. And we're sort of the US market up nearly 16%. So where have the returns come from? So this is just a list of the sort of major asset classes and the different sort of regional equity markets. So top of the pops, you've got gold. So gold's done 48% since the beginning of the year. It's done incredibly well. It's not really surprising. I think with all of the sort of the conflicts that are going on and the concerns and the worries about inflation, so that's done really well. Then you've sort of got the equity markets, you've got the emerging markets, which is led. You've got Europe, you've got UK, which amazingly, which one of the first times I've been able to say that for many years, has done well relative to other equity markets. So the UK is up sort of over 20% since the beginning of the year, which is a strong return. And I'll sort of dive into maybe reasons why that is. And then, to be honest, on the flip side, you've got crude oil, so the oil price. The oil price is the major weakness that we've seen so far this year. But aside from that, markets and sort of asset classes have done well, which may be surprising if you maybe not sort of keeping an eye on things in terms of investments. The one thing that's not on there is Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is, I suppose, receiving more popularity, more people looking at it. Is it an investable asset class? We at Quilter wouldn't treat it as an investable asset class. I think we'd have concerns with regards to like the security around the asset. But I think more people are starting to look at it. It's incredibly volatile. I think it has gone from 120,000 to below 80,000 in the space of a few months. So mind your nerve if you're holding on to that. So obviously, being sort of UK investors, I think it's quite helpful just to show how the UK has performed relative to other markets. So you can't really see it. So the top line, the blue line, is the UK, green line being Europe, and then the red line is the US. And like I said, this has been the first time since 2017 that I've been able to stand here and say that the UK has outperformed all of the sort of the major equity markets. So sort of what's driven the UK performance? So we've got sort of your sort of generally you've got your pharmaceuticals, your banks, and your defence companies that have sort of led the way. So this sort of chart tries to show basically the contribution that each of these companies have made to the overall UK stock market performance. So I'm just going to pick out Rolls-Royce, for example, and I think particularly for charities it's quite interesting because I think what we're seeing now is there's a lot more military spending. So Rolls-Royce has done really well off the back of that. And I think for charities, I think the conversation has maybe shifted from originally it was quite easy to sort of exclude defence and armaments companies. I think now, I know Charles has been having conversations with trustees that is it time to start looking at defence? Is it actually sort of an investable sort of area of the market if you're able to sort of protect people that live in your country? So maybe it's not sort of as bad as originally was once thought. The other areas have been to the banks. So HSBC, for example, is up there. The banks have done really well because of interest rates. Interest rates have been higher than people were expecting, and they've been kept there for much longer as well. So they're able to sort of generate more profits on their reserves. I suppose on the flip side, the underperformers. I suppose Diageo is probably the main one there. I think that they've seen sort of softening in the US and Chinese market, and I think there's also concerns. I'm not sure whether sort of doctors would say it's a concern, but I think people are actually starting to drink less, particularly younger people. So they've naturally been hit by that. But this is a 10-year chart, so obviously I've shown you a 1-year chart. It's been the UK has done really well. Look at it on a 10-year basis. The US, being the red line, has done incredibly well relative to the UK. So I think there's still an argument to stay global because 1 year is a very short time. So I'm just going to quickly rattle through the sort of macro picture. And I think what we're seeing is, I suppose, people are concerned and they're thinking sort of economies are sort of falling off a cliff. It's not really the case. Growth estimates for next year and 26 and 27 have started to come down, but we're still sort of all the major economies are still still going to be growing. And if you look on the sort of far right hand side, you've got sort of world's GP, so global sort of GDP estimates at around 3% for the next 3 years, and that's near enough there or thereabouts in line with history. So if you listen to the news, like I said, it all seems doom and gloom. I'd argue probably it's not actually that bad. Similarly, you've got the inflation picture as well. So the UK inflation's running at 3.5% relative to sort of, you've got US, you've got Europe, and you've got Japan on there, which are all slightly below. But we're starting to get inflation back to more normal levels. We are still away from sort of the 2% that everybody wants. But I think the sort of pressures that are out there, they are remaining, but they are coming down. Sort of we're seeing sort of wage expectations falling in terms of wage sort of hikes falling. So that's going to help reduce the pressure on inflation. So hopefully we can start to see this get down more towards 2.5%, 2% sort of by the end of next year. And then hand in hand with that, you've got interest rates. So obviously we've come out of COVID and we've seen interest rates at sort of 5%. They are starting to come down, and the general trajectory and the sort of expectation is that they will continue to fall. Like I said, they've taken longer to come down than people were initially expecting, and that's sort of been quite troublesome to sort of navigate. But I think we're sort of expecting the US to have one more cut before the end of the year, and then by next year, hopefully another sort of percent off both sort of the UK and US. So that'll be good for sort of mortgage owners and that sort of thing. So obviously, I think it's also sensible to look at what are the risks that are out there. And these, obviously, there's a number of risks and probably many that I haven't even thought about. But these are probably the three that would maybe concern me slightly. Slightly complicated chart, but what this is showing is valuations of stock markets. So I would focus on there's like the pinky diamond there. What that is showing is current valuations. And when we're talking about valuations, we're talking about price to earnings multiples. So basically, in simplistic terms, it's how much investors are willing to pay for £1 of earnings. So for North America, so the US, for example, you've got 22.7 times, which means that basically investors are willing to pay £22.70 for every £1 of earnings that they can get from the US. Doesn't really mean much sort of in isolation, but when you compare it to sort of averages and other countries, that's when it becomes a little bit more revealing. So the black lines, that shows averages over the last 30 years. So as you can see, the US on the left-hand side is actually looking above its average over the last 30 years. So people are starting to say, actually, is it getting a bit too expensive? Has it done too well? And that's one argument. So on the other hand, you could say the US has actually been expensive for quite a long time. It doesn't necessarily mean that it can't continue. But what I do think it means is that you've got less room for sort of failure. These stocks are starting to become priced for perfection. If there's any sort of weakness in any of the results, then these stocks could sell off quite considerably. The UK is probably the anomaly on there because it's actually looking cheap relative to history. And there might be a reason why it's cheap. I think sectorial-wise, we haven't really got any good tech stocks. We are all about sort of defensive sectors, your banks, your pharmaceutical companies, your sort of oil and gas companies. So you sort of, I don't want to say boring companies, but we haven't got any AI stocks, put it that way. And then just because of the composition of the world, so the global markets, so when you talk about sort of global equities, because the US is such a big chunk of that, that means that it's dragging sort of global equity valuations up as well. So this sort of feeds straight into sort of concentration. So this is equity market concentration, and this is showing how much each sort of major country forms as part of the sort of MSCI world. So global equity markets, you can see the grey line there, you've got the US. So the US actually makes up 65% of global equity markets. So when you're if you're buying sort of a global equity tracker, you're having 65% of your exposure to the US, which obviously over the last sort of 5-10 years has been great. Maybe want to consider actually, do you still want that? Is it better? I suppose we're going to go into the sort of active versus passive debate, but we can pick that up afterwards. The UK is not on there, but the UK makes up 2% of global equity markets nowadays, which I think probably historically charities have invested much more in the way of the UK, and I think probably the argument now is maybe start looking a bit more global, which we are starting to see, especially as sort of costs of investing overseas have come down. So bubbles. And I think what we're starting to see now is more sort of commentators. You've got the Bank of England have come out, the IMF, and also some sort of leading financial institutions come out and saying, okay, tech stocks have performed incredibly well. When does it stop? Does the bubble pop? And I think people are trying to draw comparisons back to sort of the dot-com bubble of 2000s, when these stocks sometimes became overvalued and then fell incredibly quickly and fast. And I think for us, you can sort of see the divergence. So this is a chart that's showing sort of the global equity market, but then in the sort of goldy line is just showing sort of the tech performance of that, and you can see that it's massively outperformed the sort of wider equity market over the last 5 years. And like I said, I think from our perspective, we think that yes, there are reasons for concern, but I wouldn't argue that we're in a bubble. I think there are maybe a few bad apples out there, but if I'd sort of highlight the risks that we see, hopefully we can sort of run through that. So the major sort of warning signal at the moment, sort of the big red flag, is what's called vendor financing. So in essence, it means that these AI companies that are involved within sort of the AI space are starting to invest in each other. So you've got NVIDIA, for example, investing in OpenAI, who produce ChatGPT. So you've got a sort of a provider investing in its own customer, and the risk you've got there. Is obviously if this sort of AI story doesn't come to sort of fruition, NVIDIA not only loses one of its major customers, but then it also loses the cash that it's invested in OpenAI. And you're starting to see that a lot more. So this chart here just sort of shows the four main areas within what they call the AI ecosystem. So you've got sort of consumers, businesses and consumers, so basically us at the top. Then you've got the AI architects, which are your OpenAIs, which, like I said, create ChatGPT. Then you've got your hyperscalers, which are the companies that are going to roll it out to the masses. And then you've got your hardware companies, which are producing essentially just the chips that go into sort of powering these models. And this is a very busy chart, but it's supposed to be, because it's just showing all of the different sort of transactions that have happened. So I wouldn't really focus on anything. It's just to show that there are a number of transactions going along, whereby sort of hardware companies are investing in sort of the likes of OpenAI, and then it's just, I think it's starting to increase sort of the vulnerability, because if this AI story doesn't play out, then there's going to be a lot of burnt fingers. So I think another slight concern is capital expenditure. So you can see that this is the hyperscalers, the likes of your Amazons, your Metas. They're investing huge amounts of money now into the AI story, and what we're starting to see now is obviously this is ramping up quite considerably. At the moment, it's fine because they're using cash that's on their balance sheets, so they're not borrowing to invest. The risk is when you start to borrow, because then it just increases the vulnerability. You're adding more risk into the system, and you're starting to see a few companies come to market now, like Oracle, for example, that are borrowing money to sort of get involved in this space. Sort of everyone wants a share of the profits, and it's fine when you've got the cash on your balance sheet, because obviously if it goes belly up, then that's on you. If you're borrowing other people's money, then it becomes a much wider issue. And I think the other concern is the demand there. So this chart basically shows sort of users of ChatGPT. So if we look at sort of H125 on the right hand side, you've got 400 million users of ChatGPT. Not sure if people in the room have used ChatGPT yet, but I would recommend having a look at it. The problem is only 20 million of the 400, so it's about 5%, are actually paying customers. OpenAI is suggesting that they want to get revenues up to about 200 billion by the end of 2030. To put that into context, Netflix, which probably most people in the room have got sort of subscriptions to, only generate 50 billion worth of revenue. So there's a huge sort of the sort of revenue figures they're talking about are astronomical. And I think the slight concern is, it's great to have all this expenditure. You now need to start monetizing it, sort of showing the sort of the use case and the business case for it. And I think that's one of the sort of major concerns that we might have, is that if ChatGPT do start to charge and say that actually there's no really free version, what's stopping sort of me going from ChatGPT to something that's free? So how do you monetize it? Do people just keep moving around? And the other models like Google, sort of Gemini, that's sort of competing with ChatGPT, and that's free. So that's the sort of quandary that they're in, is how do you actually monetize it, and is the demand there? Because if it's not, then that's a major risk to these stocks. So obviously that's a sort of whistle-stop tour in terms of the risks and what's gone on in 2025. What I would sort of, in terms of the key takeaways, is I would always stress that it's all about diversification. So I know it sounds, I'm sure you hear that a lot, but I think for us, sort of equities, I wouldn't sort of throw the towel in. I think equity markets do still look attractive. They are getting expensive, but there's pockets out there that look good. Obviously, if growth in earnings continue and they're still positive, then there's nothing to stop the sort of the train continuing. Fixed income, Charles touched on sort of gilt yields, which are sort of above what you can get in a bank. They're still looking attractive. They're above inflation. I think if you can get above inflation returns, happy days. Property markets, sort of the property, obviously coming out of COVID, sort of bottomed out, and we're now starting to see things pick back up, and things are looking a bit more attractive. Commodities, being gold and sort of other sort of commodities, they often act in very different ways to equity markets. And I think the key thing is you don't want everything moving in the same direction at the same time. So commodities, like I said, can provide a useful diversifier. Tech, like I said, there are risks out there. I don't think we're in a bubble. I think as Quilter Cheviot, we don't think we're in a bubble. You've got to be selective though, because there will be more entrants to the market that not necessarily are as good as the sort of the incumbents. So yeah, key thing is be selective, and then sort of the active versus passive debate. As I said, concentration. Just be careful what you're buying, and that is me done. So there we go. I think I'm not sure who's taking over now, but I'll hand back over. Cheers. Thank you.
Stuart Wood, who is the Head of Registrations and Customer Service from the Charity Commission. So Stuart's responsible, sorry, I standed too close, we're getting feedback. Stuart's responsible for strategic planning, operational delivery and high-level engagement with government, media and the voluntary sector. We're delighted to welcome you here today, so thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, and thank you. Good afternoon. I realised by saying good afternoon that I'm the first person to say
Hang on, sorry, I think you might be on mute.
It's on the first person to not put their microphone on. Are we on now?
Yeah, that's working.
We're on. Yeah, no, thanks ever so much.
Yes.
So I will restart. Good afternoon, and as I was saying, I'm the first person to stand in between you and lunch. I'm also the first person, I've now realised, to actually stand between the accountants and get an update on the autumn budget soon. So before they start reaching for their phones, I will endeavour to finish on time. And you won't be aware of this, but there's a huge countdown clock here, so I do feel like a bit of a bomb disposal expert at the moment, so bear with me if I start to look a bit panicked. I'm also the wild card today. I'm not here to talk about finances with you. I'm here to talk about charities. And very importantly, I'm here to talk about you, those of you in this room. And I feel very, very privileged because I've worked for small and local charities. I've worked for very large national charities. I've been a volunteer. I've been a trustee. And I'm now at the charity regulator. So I've witnessed firsthand the true value and impact of charities on society, and it feels very personal to me. Because it feels very personal to me, thank you ever so much for inviting me here today to speak with you. I really do appreciate it. And it's always a pleasure to stand here amongst so many incredible people with such an important role that they play in society. Your role keeps charities strong and trusted. My role as the Head of Registration at the Charity Commission is an amazing role. I get to see, and I witness it every single day, the true altruistic nature of people that see people in need and want to do something about it. I see people seeing people that need help, and they establish a charity to help those people. And there's very few jobs that I would want to do different to this. It truly is remarkable. I'm seeing the very best of society, and I'm surrounded by a room that represent that as well. So it's a real privilege for me to be here today. Now, as finance officers and as trustees, you're at the very heart of good governance. Your role is around financial resilience, and these seminars give an invaluable opportunity
What we've heard today was remarkable, okay? We've heard about the impact that's been made. And it's an opportunity to talk to one another, to talk to the experts in the room, to share those challenges and to consider how you'll tackle those challenges together. And together, I think we can strengthen this incredible sector. But before we dive in, I want to start with something really important, but also very simple. I want to start by saying thank you. Thank you for the work that you do day in, day out. Whether it's preparing accounts, whether it's working on financial strategy, or whether it's making the really tough decisions about sustainability within your charity, your work matters enormously. You're probably sat there thinking, that's quite a raft of paper in front of him, and we have got lunch soon, but don't panic, I can talk quickly. Your role matters because good governance and sound financial management, they're not just about compliance or avoiding regulatory intervention. They're about maintaining public trust and confidence. And when charities manage their public trust and confidence, when they manage their resources responsibly, when they operate transparently, and when they demonstrate proper stewardship, the public feels confident in supporting those charities. And that trust is the bedrock of everything that the sector does. My screen now says a sector at the heart of society, and that's something I believe strongly about. This is the first time that the Charity Commission has attended one of these annual seminars since the COVID pandemic. And interestingly, the last time I was at this particular venue, Taunton Racecourse, was to get my vaccination during the COVID pandemic. So I have sat there with certain flashbacks about the most surreal experience of my entire life, living through a pandemic. But as charities, that was quite a moment, quite a milestone for charities in our society, because they responded quickly and swiftly. There was an unprecedented surge in the demand for food, in the demand for financial support. As a country, it was really disappointing to see there was a real increase in domestic violence, but charities stepped in to support during those scenarios. And they acted quickly. Mental health, the conditions grew enormously during COVID. But charities acted quickly, and they did that because of their agility, their ability to move their services online. They created new delivery models. They forged partnerships with councils and businesses to keep that help flowing. And despite severe financial pressures, and it might feel like a long time ago, but it really wasn't that far ago, charities mobilised communities. They launched emergency appeals, and they adapted at speed to ensure that nobody was left behind. That resilience and innovation didn't just fill gaps, it saved lives and it strengthened the very fabric of our society. But beyond the pandemic, charities have continued to make extraordinary impact by addressing the emerging social needs. The big one at the moment has been the cost of living crisis. It felt like we'd just come out of the pandemic and the future was bright, but we immediately went into a cost of living crisis. And charities stepped in again to provide that critical support where it was needed most. They stepped in again to champion mental health support. They stepped in to provide food, to provide warmth. For the first time ever, we saw warm hubs established for those people that couldn't afford to warm their homes. And they gave financial assistance to those families feeling the strain. They also stepped in to tackle the climate issues. And we did some interesting research. We're aware that David Attenborough is going to be 100 next year. And the BBC have approached us and said, actually, what's the impact when David Attenborough does a documentary on TV? Does society step up and listen? Everybody talks about it. They think he's fantastic. Is there any impact on charities? And we've looked back over the last 12 years, and every single time David Attenborough runs a series on TV, somebody sets up a challenge, somebody sets up a charity to tackle the challenge that has been raised. So when David Attenborough talks about plastics in the ocean, within a month, we will see at least 3 applications for organisations looking to tackle plastics in the ocean. It's a sector that evolves. It's a sector that meets what society needs and what the world needs. We're not insular, okay? We're global and we act across the world. Importantly, charities step in. They strengthen social cohesion. Okay, they create spaces for dialogue and inclusion. They ensure vulnerable groups are not left behind. And today, charities stand not just as crisis responders, but as architects of a fair and more connected society. Now, charities remain woven into the fabric of our communities. They provide these essential services, they champion the causes, and they respond to needs that neither government nor business can fully meet. Their impact is vast and deeply personal. There are now around 170,000 registered charities in England and Wales, crossing every conceivable path from arts to heritage to education to religion. And collectively, these organisations generate over 100 billion in annual income, which is about 4% of the GDP for the UK. So they're not just don't have an impact in terms of those that they're helping, they're a significant contributor to the economy. They hold assets worth £340 billion. And with 1.3 million employees, charities aren't just changing lives, they're a major employer, accounting for 4% of the national workforce in our country, with jobs that deliver purpose as well as income. But behind every one of these statistics is a story. It's a family supported through crisis, a child given new opportunities, and a community brought together. These numbers represent lives changed and futures transformed. We've heard a lot about technology from Ben, and it was a superb session. And I think it's important we touch on that in terms of where charities have kind of embraced this and the challenges that they found with it as well. And over the past decade, technological innovation has reshaped how charities in England and Wales operate, engaging donors and delivering services in ways that have never been done before. These advances have not only improved efficiency, but they've also expanded the reach and the impact of charitable work in ways that was imaginable a generation ago. I'm going to talk a little bit first about Bluetooth and contactless giving. And I'm going to do an experiment that I've never done before, which always carries a risk that it might fall flat and it might fall over here. But can I see a show of hands for people that have got cash with them today? And you don't need to panic, I'm not going to do a collection, by the way. But could you raise your hand if you're carrying cash today? Okay, it's about 2/3 of the room are carrying cash. Okay, that says something really important. It suggests that actually, if you're out fundraising, 1/3 of the people that you're approaching do not carry cash. And that's where Bluetooth and contactless technology is important, isn't it? You'll go to many events now, most events, be them large events or even be them places of worship. And the method for collection now is often a phone, okay? You don't even need the separate device. Charities embracing technology for fundraising are tapping into a market. And let's face it, if you're doing that, the potential is that you're going to be 1/3 more successful than if you're just collecting cash. So do consider how you can embrace technology for fundraising. We've heard a little bit about crypto assets as well from Ben earlier, and Ben was absolutely correct that these carry enormous risk. It's a very volatile sector. Investing in that is something we wouldn't recommend. But it's not just about the opportunity to invest in it, it's about saying actually there's an opportunity here whereby we can collect funds from crypto assets. So organisations like the British Red Cross, Alzheimer's Research UK and the RNLI, they've been accepting crypto donations for a while. It's just an additional source of income for those tech-savvy and engaged donors. And whilst it carries risk, we would encourage you to consider the options around that. Can I see another show of hands? And I'm doing this as well, by the way, just to keep you awake, but also so I get an understanding of who I'm talking to. Can I see a show of hands for anybody that has children or grandchildren? Fantastic. That's most of the room. Because I'm going to talk about drones now. And those of you with children and grandchildren will know drones as those annoying things that come out at Christmas, knock the ornaments off your mantel shelf and break everything. But charities are using drones in a very different way. Charities are using drones to deliver emergency aid where people can't get to. When there was the earthquake in Morocco, charities stepped in. They deployed drones with heat-seeking technology to find survivors under the rubble. So drones are being used by charities across the world to intervene, to step in and to help where humans can't do it. We've recently registered an organisation that's providing drones on ships so that if somebody falls overboard, the drone will take the life ring to the person that's fallen overboard to keep them afloat. So we're seeing uses of technology now that were unimaginable a generation ago. One of the more bizarre ones, the use of satellites. Satellites have been around for as long as I can remember. But back in August, we registered the Civic Space Foundation. The Civic Space Foundation are a charity. They're launching low Earth orbiting satellites and they're providing that imagery for free to charities. So if you're monitoring environmental change, you can access the data from this organisation for free, making your information far more credible. If there is a flood, you can access their data so you can see how your responders can access those areas to help the people that are needed. If there's an earthquake, you can access their data to see where people are affected. So we've got organisations now using satellite technology to improve charity efficiency and resources. And we set a precedent by registering the Civic Space Foundation, but it embodies everything that it stands for, doesn't it? It's ingenuity and it's creativity. And that's what we expect to see from charities nowadays, embracing these advances to move forward. Charles mentioned earlier AI. And Ben has also captured on AI. I feel remiss if I wasn't covering AI. You'll be pleased to hear the thing I'm not going to talk about is SORP, because I'm lost by that, and I'm so very grateful for Lexi and Sarah to have done that earlier. But AI is emerging as the real game changer out there, okay? So charities like Prostate Cancer UK, they're using AI-driven analytics to optimise their fundraising campaigns. It's doubling their ROI compared to previous years. Parkinson's UK employs AI-powered social listening to adapt services in real time, whilst the Children's Society are using AI interpreters so they don't need humans there. And, you know, from a data protection perspective, there are real advantages around that kind of use. There are AI chatbots out there helping increase accessibility for disabled users by providing easy-to-read information and guidance. And these innovations are freeing staff up for that complex work, for that considerative work, to enable these charities to deliver efficient support. I'm going to talk a little bit about local impact. Because standing here in Taunton and looking out across all of you attending today, the diversity of your work is staggering. Across the Southwest, charities are transforming lives every single day. They're the heartbeat of our communities. They offer hope, they offer support, and they offer opportunity where it's needed most. And it's going to be my apology in advance that I cannot mention everybody in this room today. To do so would take a week. It would be a fantastic week, but I can't have time to do that today, bearing in mind the countdown clock here. But I do want to talk about some of the charities represented here today and shine a light on just a few of those examples. And perhaps you'll indulge me and you can absorb your embarrassment slightly. If I'm talking about your charity, could you raise a hand so people know who to come and talk to later on if they have any further questions on it? First organisation I'm going to talk about is the Devon and Somerset Air Ambulance. So we've got Sarah in the room. Dorset Air Ambulance, my apologies. Hi Sarah. You can correct me if I get any of the facts wrong here now, so feel free to jump in. But we are starting with a true lifesaver, the Dorset and Somerset Air Ambulance. For over 25 years, the Dorset and Somerset Air Ambulance has been a lifeline for change across Somerset. It's been a life-saving force, and since its launch in 2000, the charity's undertaken more than 29,000 missions, attending to critical emergencies almost every single day. Last year alone, they flew nearly 3,000 missions. That's an average of about 8 a day. And behind every one of those missions, it's a story, isn't it? It's a life changed, it's the family given hope, and it's a future restored. And it's not just about emergencies. Dorset and Somerset Air Ambulance supports patients and families long after the helicopters land. They have liaison nurses offering care and guidance throughout recovery. Looking ahead, and you might want to talk to Sarah later, because they're really ambitious. The ambition is for a second helicopter, a new base, and ultimately 24 hours coverage. That means more lives saved, more families supported, and more communities protected. And continuing the theme of compassion and dedication, we're joined here today by St Margaret's Hospice. Scott, have we got you out there somewhere? Oh, we can't see him. I could have embarrassed him enormously as well. We'll do that next time. But for over 40 years, St Margaret's has delivered specialist palliative care and end-of-life care across Somerset. Guided by a simple but profound belief, care should be free and accessible to all, wherever it's needed most. Last year alone, they supported nearly 5,000 people, patients, families, carers, providing physical, emotional and spiritual care where it matters most. Their 24-hour advice line has answered over 31,000 calls, offering reassurance when it was needed most. And they go beyond comfort at the end of life. They have sunflower day centres that help patients live well for as long as possible, whilst their teams made thousands of home visits to deliver that personal care. Despite the emotional weight of their work, patients consistently rate their care 4.9 out of 5, a testament to their excellence and humanity. And they're looking ahead. They've also got a bold 3-year strategy which will expand access, it will strengthen community outreach, and it deepen partnerships across Somerset. But what stands out most, as it does with many of you here today, is the power of community. It's the staff, the volunteers and supporters who make all this possible, whether answering late night calls or holding a hand in that quiet moment of farewell. St Margaret's embodies the belief that every life and every moment matters. Interestingly, we're also joined today by one of the country's oldest almshouse charities in England, stretching back to 1635. We have the Taunton Heritage Trust. Do we have Norman and Vivian here? Fantastic, welcome. Now again, correct me if I get my facts wrong, but the Trust provides 66 sheltered homes across 5 historic sites for community on low incomes. Places that offer dignity, independence and community. Beyond housing, they award over 250 grants each year to individuals and families in need, as well as local charities, students, making a real difference across Taunton Deane. And their stewardship is exemplary, preserving historic buildings whilst investing in people. This is heritage with a heart. This is where history becomes a foundation for care, connection and hope. Established far more recently and operating across Wellington and Taunton, we have On Your Bike. Do we have Tracy and Amanda here? Hello, welcome. Now, On Your Bike transforms donated bicycles into more than transport. They become instruments of renewal. Through training and support, individuals facing social isolation gain practical skills, confidence, and a renewed sense of belonging. And I remember seeing the application for On Your Bike in 2010. I genuinely do. It stood out at the time. And it stood out because I think it embodied everything we stand for at the Charity Commission. It was innovation, it was inclusion, and it was real-world impact. On Your Bike has provided training, purpose and community to people affected by social exclusion, physical disability, mental health challenges, homelessness, unemployment and more. Through fully equipped workshops staffed by their SciTech trained mechanics, they refurbish unwanted bicycles, giving purpose to tired bikes and to the people that they support. Beneficiaries regain confidence, develop vocational skills and crucially move into employment. Behind every refurbished bike is a story of transformation, restored health, renewed social inclusion and a more sustainable environment. By offering affordable bikes, they champion both well-being and a greener transport choice. And representing the arts, we have the Taunton Theatre Association. Val, are you here today? Hello, Val. What other name might we know you as?
Sorry?
What other name do we know you as? Absolutely. I say the Taunton Theatre Association and people say who? We will know you as the Taunton Brew House, a cultural cornerstone which brings world-class theatre, film and creative workshops to our region, enriching lives through the arts and fostering a vibrant community engagement. They don't just stage performances, they create opportunities through initiatives like Thrive, welcoming a weekly space for wellbeing and community connection, and their inspiring Pay It Forward scheme, which ensures family in need can enjoy the magic of theatre. The Taunton Brewhouse breaks down barriers and brings people together. Their commitment goes further, forging partnership with local businesses, championing sustainability and securing long-term funding to keep creativity thriving. And at the heart of it all are their dedicated volunteers whose passion makes every moment possible. We also have in the audience, in force I should add, the West Somerset Railway Heritage Trust. Do we have Steve, Martin and Don here? Yeah. In force, I think you're the only group represented with 3 of you. Slightly disappointed you're not in the overalls with the full outfit, but welcome. As one of our sector's leading heritage charities, the Trust plays a vital role in preserving and revitalising railway history for future generations. Since its establishment in 1972, it's brought the story of the West Somerset Railway to life. And thanks to a successful Heritage Lottery Award, the fund has significantly enhanced its visitor engagement, making the railway historically accessible and inspiring to families and schools alike. Beyond education, the heritage, the Trust makes a profound impact on tourism and the local economy. The West Somerset Railway is one of the region's most popular attractions, drawing thousands of visitors every year, helping to sustain jobs in the community. The Trust work ensures that the economic benefit continues whilst promoting Somerset as a destination rich in culture and history. And if you're looking for an example of compassion, we're joined by the Conquest Centre. Have we got Lottie and Karen here today? Hello, welcome. I recently had the privilege of visiting the Conquest Centre and seeing their work firsthand. And thank you for being so welcoming when I did attend. And what struck me most was the sense of warmth and purpose there. It filled every corner of the centre. It's not just about riding, it's about transformation. Every session, every interaction is designed to empower individuals of all ages and abilities, whether they face physical challenges, learning difficulties, or simply need a safe space to grow. The Conquest Centre has come a long way since its first two ponies, aptly called Adam and Eve, I should add. That was back in 1965, and it now offers therapeutic riding, carriage driving, sensory experiences, and even vocational training. Their facilities are outstanding. Indoor and outdoor arenas, woodland trails, wheelchair-accessible carriages and sensory rooms, all tailored to create opportunities for independence, confidence and joy. But beyond the facilities, it's the people, it's the dedicated team and volunteers who make the magic happen. They create an environment where goals are achieved, where friendships are formed and where lives are changed. Seeing that in person was truly inspiring. The Conquest Centre exemplifies what charity is all about: compassion in action, innovation in care, and a relentless commitment to improving lives. They remind us that when we combine expertise with empathy, we can unlock potential in ways that ripple far beyond the riding arena. I spoke earlier about the value of charities in England and Wales from a financial perspective, but in truth, I enormously underestimated the financial value. By way of illustration, we're joined today by the Cathedral Church of St Andrew in Wells, or as you're going to know it, Wells Cathedral. Do we have Nikki here? Hi, Nikki. Welcome. I think we'll all know that it's a national institution. It's a national monument. You cannot put a value on Wells Cathedral. Last year, we went through the process of registering all the English cathedrals in the UK, and somebody did ask the question, well, you've got a value of assets of 340 million in the sector. Now that you've added the English cathedrals, how do you value it? And our response is simple, and our response is accurate. The value of charities to our society is priceless. And I think that's the true reality of what we're talking about today. Now, Wells Cathedral, it's a cultural beacon within the Church of England, whose work reaches far beyond its medieval walls. They safeguard one of England's greatest Gothic treasures, ensuring its heritage endures for future generations. But their impact goes further, doesn't it? Beyond its architectural splendour, Wells Cathedral serves as a centre for worship, enriching lives and fostering community engagement across Somerset and beyond. Now, these examples, they all represent the spirit of every organisation here today. Collectively, you are the fabric of our community, woven from compassion, resilience and innovation. You remind us that when we come together, we can build a stronger, safer and more hopeful community. And that's why charities truly sit at the heart of our society. I am truly sorry that I don't have time to mention all the remarkable charities in this room, because you all deserve recognition for the great work that you do. But let's celebrate all of you in this room and ensure that your work continues to thrive. Because in Somerset, in the Southwest and across the country, charity isn't just about giving, it's about changing lives. As financial managers and as trustees, you're not just safeguarding individual charities, you're helping protect the reputation of the entire sector. Every decision that you make about budgets, reserves and risk management continues to that bigger picture. We heard earlier about the charity risk assessment, which highlighted that the biggest challenges that charities face at the moment are financial resilience and risks to public benefit. We know that many charities are under real financial pressure. Rising costs, tougher fundraising conditions and growing demand for services. I'm going to just reiterate on what was mentioned earlier. Over the past 5 years, the demand for charitable support has grown dramatically. The proportion of people relying on charities for food, medical care or financial assistance has tripled from just 3% to 9%.
At the same time, financial pressures on charities are clear. In 2023, nearly a quarter of all charities reported an operating deficit, and that was up from 20% the previous year. And I suspect that none of this surprises you, certainly not after the fact that you've heard it already this morning. But you're seeing these pressures firsthand. Difficult conversations about sustainability, tough decisions about priorities, and trustees grappling with uncomfortable questions about the future. The Charity Commission won't tell charities what specific decisions to make. That's for the trustees who know their own context. But we can help ensure that trustees have the tools that they need. That's why we've launched the Financial Resilience Campaign, including online guidance and a financial health tool check. These resources are designed to help trustees understand their financial position and make informed decisions about the future and their sustainability. But alongside these financial challenges, we see a generational opportunity, an opportunity to reignite philanthropy as a force for renewal. We heard earlier that overall charitable giving in the UK remains strong, around 15 billion donated in 2024. But the number of donors is falling, and high net worth giving appears less robust than in comparable nations. Some estimates suggest a 5 billion gap compared to countries like Canada and New Zealand. Now, why does this matter? Well, it matters because philanthropy isn't just about filling fundraising gaps. It brings with it agility, innovation, and risk-taking that public funding often cannot. It supports core costs and it seeds new initiatives, and it gives charities the confidence to plan for the long term. Alongside the financial challenges that charities face, there's a powerful story of generosity unfolding right here in Somerset and across the southwest. A story that shows how local philanthropy can transform lives and communities. Take the Somerset Community Foundation, who are represented here today. Can I see a hand anywhere? Maybe they're shy, or maybe they've missed this opportunity, which would be a tragic shame, because they've awarded over 31 million to individual charities and community groups, thanks to the generosity of individuals, businesses and trusts. In the past year alone, the Somerset Community Foundation has distributed £4 million in funding, everything from youth projects to mental health support to tackling rural isolation and poverty. These grants aren't just numbers. They represent hope, they represent opportunity and resilience for thousands of people across the county. And we've seen extraordinary acts of giving in times of crisis. After the tragic Exmoor coach crash in July, the Somerset Community Foundation launched the Together for West Somerset appeal, raising over £100,000 to provide immediate relief and long-term support for families and children affected. That's philanthropy at its most urgent and most impactful, mobilising resources quickly when communities need them most. And philanthropy here also fuels creativity and innovation. Take the Trash Trail in Taunton, a community arts initiative that raised £10,000 for charities last year, and that followed in the incredible footsteps of the earlier Dragon Trail, which raised an incredible £100,000, and that established a permanent charitable fund benefiting dozens of grassroots projects. These campaigns show how imagination and generosity can combine to make a real lasting change. And then there's the cultural powerhouse of the Glastonbury Festival, which donated £5.9 million to charitable causes in 2024, including £2 million to the NHS Somerset charity for a specialist cancer suite in Taunton. It also supported global humanitarian efforts and local youth projects, proving that philanthropy can scale from local impact to international aid. And these examples that remind us that philanthropy in Somerset and the Southwest isn't about handouts, it's about hand-ups and start-ups, enabling charities to innovate, to respond to crisis and to plan for the future. It's about building a stronger, more resilient community where everyone has the chance to thrive. As financial managers and as accountants, you play a crucial role in enabling this. Our guidance encourages a receiving culture, helping boards to make important decisions about accepting donations, even when they may be contentious. The law assumes that donations are generally a good thing, but we've heard from Ben now about actually how investing needs to be thought through. Would it be prudent for you to invest in a military organisation? Would it be prudent for you to accept donations from a tobacco company? And we know these difficult decisions. The Commission's expectation of you as trustees is that you consider these decisions expertly is that you do seek advice and you make the interest in the best interest of the organisation. And it's a fine balance for a cancer organisation to accept funding from a tobacco company. On one hand, there's the risk that they're endorsing that tobacco company. On the other hand, it may help hundreds of lives. It may just help one life, but is that health worth it? Okay, so you need to make those accountable decisions as trustees. But the UK remains one of the safest and most trusted places to give, and that's thanks to strong regulation and transparency. That's something we should celebrate and promote. And beyond finance, governance remains a key issue in many regulatory cases. Beyond conflicts of interest, decisions without proper authority, lack of collective oversight, strengthening trustee understanding and engagement is critical. Charles mentioned Centre Barley earlier. I won't go into any more details on that because he was absolutely correct in terms of that assumption. And what we noticed there was weakness in charity management, lack of definition in terms of the roles, and it resulted in us having to issue a regulatory action plan. And whilst they may comply with that regulatory action plan, the time taken to restore public trust and to get those donations in will be far longer. Whilst policies are improving in this sector, the whole culture and practice does need to follow. People must need to know what to do when concerns arise and feel confident they'll be acted on. I've got a flashing clock now, which means the bomb's about to explode. So before I finish, I want to encourage you, especially those with strong financial knowledge, to consider how your expertise can make a difference beyond your current role. Many charities struggle to attract trustees with financial skills. Your knowledge is invaluable for boards making strategic decisions. And trusteeship isn't just about giving back, it's about gaining experience in leadership, in strategy and risk management that can enrich your own career. Our research shows that over half of working age trustees say the role supports their professional development. Closing thoughts. Huzzah. The work you do matters to your charities, to the people you serve, and to the sector as a whole. The Charity Commission doesn't always make your lives easier, but we do aim to regulate in a way that is both proportionate, targeted, and it focuses on what really matters, which is public trust and confidence. Thank you for your time today. And to reiterate what I said at the beginning, thank you for everything that you do. Thank you for everything that makes the charitable sector such an important part and meaningful part of our society. So, thank you ever so much.
Thank you, Stuart. We really appreciate you joining us today to share some of those really interesting views of the Charity Commission. And probably I'd like to thank you and say we really appreciate your acknowledgement and the Charity Commission's acknowledgement of all of our work in the charitable sector. And thank you for highlighting a lot of that work that takes place in the South West. So now what we'll do is if we can welcome Stuart, Lexi and Charles back up, and we'll take questions if anyone has any questions in the room or online if you have any you want to add to the online chat. Yeah, that's fine. Yes, what was your question?
My name's Zoe. My question is about the SORP and early adoption. So we're a March year end, which most charities are. So it's not going to impact us until next reporting year. But we've done a lot of work on our trustees report in the last sort of 6 months, and it's actually moving a lot towards what the SORP's recommending. Is there any reason why we couldn't bring that in now?
Yeah, no worries, good question.
So shall I just repeat the question?
Yeah.
So the question was in relation to having a March year end and whether or not it would make sense to early adopt the SORP and take those changes in the next set of financial statements.
So I think particularly from a trustee's annual report perspective, you're able to put as much information in there as you like. And I think we often encourage charities to include more information. Sarah referenced legacies previously, which is something we've always encouraged charities to talk about, where there's been that difference between income and what they've received. So absolutely, I think the more information you can include, and if there's information you know you're going to have to provide next year anyway in your trustee annual report, fantastic, include that now. Would really encourage that. Where it's the kind of more technical accounting, so income and leases, I think generally the sector is looking at adopting those when they need to, rather than in advance. I wouldn't encourage anybody to do that in advance, I have to say, particularly because you have to have that information at your opening position. So if you're looking for your March 25 year end, you're actually going to be looking back to the 1st of April 24 and looking at any revenue or leases that are spanning that point. Now, that may or may not affect you, but I think certainly from a disclosure standpoint, certainly areas around reserves, we've been encouraging charities to give those more detailed disclosures for quite a while now, and it's great that they're now more explicit in the SORP in terms of those requirements. So yes, absolutely.
Okay. Do you have any other questions in the room? Yes, Pip. Okay, so there was a question around AI, so I need to repeat it for people who are joining us online, and about a charity that's decided to create an AI policy where they wouldn't use it, and have asked around how decisions are made and to minimise the risks around AI and the basis behind those.
Yeah, I'm probably the worst person to ask that question, Bob, because I'm not great with detail. But so from a firm point of view, obviously we've got people internally doing it, making sure that we are compliant across the whole data protection. I have to say for the charities, per se, other than making sure people are comfortable with being recorded, I'm not sure we've actually looked too much at the impact. I probably shouldn't admit that. The problem with this technology is it is changing so fast. There's a half full and half empty. You can either live there in fear of all the things that could go wrong, or you embrace the technology and you address it as you go through. I'm afraid I sit on the latter camp rather than the former camp. Because I think, like all of these things, you need to learn about how they work and the impacts, and then just pick up and learn by your mistakes. Because the more you can do that, actually, the quicker you're going to learn. So I'm afraid I'm a bit of the Wild West, and go out, try it, use it, and everything else, and worry less about, I probably shouldn't say that, the bits you might be compromising from a regulation point of view. Because everybody knows this is new technology and we're just all learning at the same time. I hope that's sort of given you a reasonable answer to your question.
Can I come in on some points around, because we're also at the point of actually using AI in the most, and it's part of the government agenda, isn't it? It's the one next big thing, it's the use of AI. You're absolutely right, first of all, about the environmental impact. If you ask AI a question, the pure processing power of that is astronomical. If you then say thank you when it gives you the answer, it's the equivalent to leaving 5 light bulbs on for an hour, I understand. So the environmental impact of using AI is considerable, but it can, as we've all heard, offer huge benefits in terms of efficiency moving forward. You're absolutely right as well about the information that you put into an AI system, whichever one you're using. You need to be mindful about where that's going. So within government, we are very limited to using AI that won't absorb and won't retain the information that we put into it. It's purely going to look at the information we put in there, give us a response, and it doesn't retain it. So you will need to consider whether the systems that you're using are actually capturing that information, storing it somewhere else, because that will be a GDPR issue. So I think there's those considerations, but I think Charles is right. This is at such an early stage of implementation. We're all coming up with environmental policies in terms of when should AI be used, when's it prudent to do that, because it could be actually environmentally better to get AI to answer that in 30 seconds than a team of people working on it for 2 days. But yeah, they're very valid considerations. And I think as we move forward, over the last 6 months, we've seen a huge surge forward. I would expect over the next 6 months as well, we see far more policies being openly available about the use of that one. But I think it's really important to raise that, because we're all saying AI is an opportunity, but not without risk, I think is what we're suggesting there.
Yeah, sorry, and I did miss I didn't hear your comment about the environment part of it. The only thing I will just say on the environment part of it is that technology is the bit that's going to actually probably get us out of climate change. And if you just look up above you, assuming these are LEDs, you look about the way that lighting has changed and the consumption, and the same thing will happen with AI and everything else. So from an investment point of view, looking at Ben here, is one thing we're looking at it from and putting, I suppose, pressure on companies to be making sure that they're using it wisely, but it's also accepting that change. I don't know if you've got anything to add on that.
No, I think you've covered that. Well, I think just from sort of our side, in terms of looking at sort of companies that are using the AI, like you said, it is all about sort of the sort of the data privacy and that sort of thing. We sort of, Charles said, we use it internally, and all of the information that goes into it is fully encrypted. It's sort of nothing that we put in leaks out, and it's, yeah, I think it's an incredibly powerful tool. And yeah, there are risks out there that people probably that we don't really know about just yet. But that's, like Charles said, I don't think that's a reason for us that we would sort of say that we're not going to use it, because I think it's the benefits that we get from it are astronomical.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any more questions in the room? Yes.
It's probably a question for Lexi, I'm not sure. I'm not an accountant or a trustee at the moment, so this is probably maybe a silly question for many people in the room. It's just one thing that crossed my mind really because of the charity that I just run a charity. So it was about the exchange transactions, and I was thinking about, I just want to know, because there's so much complexity in it, because there's so much extra work in it, what is the problem it is trying to solve?
That's absolutely right. Shall I repeat the question?
Yeah, repeat the question first.
So the question was around the change in income recognition and with exchange and non-exchange transaction, and what is the problem that the new guidance is trying to solve?
Okay, great question. I don't believe there is a problem that this is trying to solve. To give you the history of how this has come about, international financial reporting standards have had these requirements for revenue and leases for about 10 years now. So they've been out there, but they've been adopted by PLCs or large corporates. They came into UK accounting standards, FRS 102, with the most recent update, which was published earlier in the year. So, but the SORP, the Charities Accounting Standard, is based on FRS 102. So once the UK standards have said we're going to align with the international ones, so we've brought this in, the SORP is then essentially forced to reflect those within the Charities Accounting Standards. So this is nothing that's designed for charities, it's a much broader change. And the challenge is now how it's applied by charities, but there's no leniency in terms of whether to apply it or not. So from my view, it's not designed to solve any problems, particularly from a charitable perspective. What it's doing is applying some very technical, I think, thought processes to the recognition of income. So income is no longer when you receive that money into the bank. It's looking at, well, have I earned it? Am I entitled to it? And so there's a divorcing of the recognition of income in your account and the actual receipt of money in your in your bank, which is why I think, called me old-fashioned, but I like a cash flow statement because it's actually money in and money out and much more understandable for the users of a set of accounts. So I don't believe it's solving a problem. And actually for many charities, it's kind of creating an administrative problem and making the accounts less understandable to the users, which in fairness, I think the SORP making body recognises, and hence acknowledging that overriding these requirements is not within their gift. And that's why I think that was quite notable language that they chose there to describe that.
That answers my question. It doesn't solve my problem.
No, sorry. Yeah, that's beyond my gift as well, unfortunately, but I can help you with it.
Do you have any other questions in the room at the moment? No. I've got a... yes.
Stuart, I'm aware that there are huge numbers of new charity registration applications coming into the Charity Commission in recent months, which I think has had an impact on the Commission's sort of lead times in terms of how long it can take to process a new charity registration. But I was going to ask whether the reacting to that and possibly taking steps to increase capacity to deal with the demand. Noticing that, I'm a charity lawyer, I do register a lot of new charities in the course of the year, and I just noticed the lead times have become significantly extended.
So if I just summarise the question for those online. So that was in relation to registering charities at the Charity Commission, and at the moment, because there are a number of new registrations, there's quite a long lead time with that, and how the Charity Commission are looking into that.
Yeah, it's a section I'm really passionate about. I always go back to before CIOs were introduced as a model of governance for charities back in 2012, where we were receiving about 5,500 applications to register a charity every year. This year, we're expecting 11,800 applications to register a new charity, more than double what it was when CIOs were introduced back in 2012. And actually, that's a 19% increase on last year. So a huge growth in the number of people applying to register charities. Interestingly, our grant rate has dropped. It's now down to 46%. So less than half of all those organisations applying to register a charity are successful. We're far more robust in our assessment of charitable status than we ever were before. And I think, and I hope that that's great news for all of you in this room, because it says a lot about the value that we place on charities, the importance that we place on it, and its important role in society, and that we're going to work very hard in ensuring that only those that truly meet that legal requirement are registered. But it does have a knock-on impact, and this growth predominantly is strangely also driven by AI. Grant makers are now reporting they're getting twice as many grants as they were last year because people are using AI to support grant applications. Employers are reporting that they're getting twice as many job applications because people are using AI to submit job applications. And we in the Commission was not expecting it, but are also getting this huge growth, with around a third of our applications being completed using AI, which is generic information not relevant to them and very hard for us to work through. So it has created a real backlog in our workload, and it's now taking up to about 16 weeks for a new application to be assigned to a case officer before we can move it forward. But there is a plan, and the plan is, and we've just been successful in receiving funding, that in April 2026 we'll start a project to revamp the registration process. We think it's probably going to take about 2 years, so just to manage expectations, it will take about 2 years, but then we're looking to implement something that will embed AI as part of the solution, that will allow us to move forward with that to mitigate the impact on that one. During the interim, we've also been successful in obtaining additional funding to stop those queues going any worse whilst we develop that new service. So it's not something we're happy about that we've got these delays. It is driven by the increase in volume, but there is a plan to tackle it. It is using AI. Interestingly, we're going to be using AI to assess AI, which is quite an unusual situation that we're going to find ourselves in. But there is a plan to tackle it, yes.
I've just got a couple of questions from online, which I think would be quite interesting to hear the answers for. So will the Charity Commission be going along the lines of, as Companies Houses, with confirming trustee IDs, how the director IDs are being confirmed?
Well, interestingly, part of our process in the new application service is to move to the one log-on system that's used across government. So the same service that you use to log on to HMRC, we intend to embed in our new application service to verify trustee identity. So we're looking to coincide with the rest of government in terms of the single sign-on service that all government departments will be using, to coincide with that one, which will stop you from the need to kind of duplicate what you've already done before. So yes, absolutely.
I've got one more online question, which was in relation to banking provisions for small charities, and that now charities are being charged by the big banks, even if they're very small, for their banking provision. Is there anything that the Charity Commission can do to put pressure on banks to do their part in helping out the small charities?
Yes, and I think we might come in with this one together. I think from the Charity Commission's perspective, we're more than disappointed. We're really angry about this. It's something that we feel very passionate about, and our chair and our CEO have written to all the big banks to express our dissatisfaction, and we've also brought it in line with the Minister to raise this one. During that process as well of expressing the dissatisfaction, we've also formed the UK Finance Consortium, which has representatives from all the largest banks in the UK, and the Charity Commission to try and grapple with that. We've got online some guidance now about those accounts that charities can use that do not charge. Many of you might be in a situation where your bank's saying, okay, we're now going to charge you for your services. What I'd encourage you to do in those situations is to go online to the Charity Commission website, look at those banks which offer charity banking without a charge, and to switch to those accounts. And I think actually looking to move and moving with your feet and your funding might be the most vocal way in which we can do it. But we share those concerns. We do want to address it. It's proving quite the challenge to tackle. Charles, do you want to come in terms of what the sector are doing as well?
Yeah, I've got somebody.
Oh.
We had a thing where we were moved automatically from a charities account. You can appeal, but that was purely based on the turnover. So it wasn't an individual making a decision. We just based it something at transactions. You can appeal against it. We did. We will move them back to a charity account. If you haven't appealed, you can appeal.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on this. I have to say, when this first cropped up, I thought this was a commercial issue, that the banks were saying that particularly smaller charities were too small and they didn't want the accounts. This wasn't that at all. What's happened is that where we used to have branches and people you could go and talk to, we've now moved to call centres. And of course, what's the biggest issue is they don't understand the constitutions, and they're not that many, but there are 4 or 5. Having a royal charter is a big problem, but we'll put that one to one side. And the staff were just not trained appropriately. Now, there is a consortium. Dr. Claire Mills at the Charity Finance Group has been leading a charge on this. If anybody has got really specific problems, I would suggest that, and I'd be very happy to share her email. I'm sure she wouldn't be happy for me, but anyway, yes, she will. She will, because I happened to be speaking to her last week. If you want to share something, please feed it back into her, because she has really got the bit between her teeth and is charging for the sector on it, and is talking at all the right levels. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would also say, and this also relates to philanthropy and charitable giving, if you have an opportunity to bend the ear of your local MP, think about how you're going to bend it, and then bend it hard, because I don't think a lot of politicians really necessarily appreciate the value of what charities do and the challenges that you face. So if you do get an opportunity to speak to your local MP, and I have to say I don't know who it is down here, take that opportunity, because then they can take it back and feed it into Westminster, which will also help the Charity Commission, because although Stuart hasn't said that much about it, very quietly, I think it's fair to say, the Commission does go in to Westminster and does act as a champion, not that it's your role necessarily, but trying to get greater understanding. And I have to say the current government, I think there is certainly more receptive towards it. The previous government, and I'm not making anything on how you should vote, was certainly less appreciative of the sector.
Thank you. So I think we're slightly over on time there, so I think we're going to have to stop with the questions now. So to those of you online, thank you for joining us today. For everyone in the room, if you've got any more questions, we're all going to be around over lunch, so you can come and ask us questions individually. Food is just being served at the back of the room, so please do stay, have some food, and take the opportunity to network with the other charities who are in the room today. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much.